Welcome to Lotus Whisper, Zen Tales for Sleep. Tonight, we begin a gentle journey inward, a quiet unfolding of the mind and body. The day, with all its demands and hurried moments, may still echo within you. A subtle tension in your shoulders, a restless current in your thoughts. But here, in this quiet space, we will learn to let go. We will not force stillness, but rather invite it. Like a soft blanket on a cool evening, through ancient tales and simple wisdom, we will explore the art of release, allowing the weight of the world to drift away, leaving only the gentle rhythm of your own breath. Let us begin this slow descent into tranquility, into the deep, restorative peace that awaits. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this. Part 1. The Weight of a Single Stone. In a monastery nestled high in the mountains, where the clouds often drifted below the temple gates, lived a young monk named Kaito. He was diligent and earnest, his robes always neat, his movements precise as he performed his daily duties. Yet a deep and unyielding weight seemed to follow him, settling upon his shoulders like a heavy cloak he could never remove. When he awoke before dawn, the weight was there, pressing on his chest. When he walked the cool, dark corridors to the meditation hall, the weight was in his steps, making each footfall a conscious effort. The source of this burden was not a physical ailment, but the ceaseless turning of his own mind. His thoughts were not light and fleeting things like butterflies in a summer garden. To Kaito, they were stones. Each worry, each regret, each fear for the future was a solid, tangible object that he felt compelled to pick up and carry. There was the smooth, gray stone of a harsh word he had spoken to a fellow novice the week before. He turned it over and over in his mind, feeling its polished surface, a constant reminder of his impatience. There was the jagged, dark stone of a mistake he had made while tending the master's prized bonsai tree. A small branch accidentally snapped. The sharp edges of this stone seemed to prick at his conscience whenever he passed the garden. And then there were the larger stones, the heavy, formless boulders of his future. Would he ever find true understanding? Was he worthy of this path? These were the stones he carried on his back, the ones that made his breath shallow and his brow permanently furrowed. His days were a quiet struggle against this invisible collection. When he swept the temple courtyard, his task was not simply to guide the fallen maple leaves into gentle piles. It was to do so while balancing the immense weight of his thoughts. The simple bamboo broom felt as heavy as a waterlogged log. Each sweep was a monumental effort, not because the leaves were many, but because his mind was so full. He would see a single, perfect red leaf, and instead of appreciating its fleeting beauty, his mind would produce a new stone. The thought that all beautiful things must fade, that winter was coming, that he too would one day wither and be swept away. He would bend, mentally, to pick up this new stone, adding it to the pile that already strained his spirit. He tried to fight them. In the meditation hall, while the other monks settled into a profound stillness, their spines straight, their breathing soft and even, Kaito waged a silent war. He would try to build a wall in his mind to keep the stones out, but the thoughts were like water seeping through the cracks. Or they were like vines growing over the wall and pulling it down. He would try to throw the stones away, to hurl them into a mental abyss, but they were strangely sticky, clinging to his consciousness, and the very effort of throwing them seemed to make them heavier, more present. The more he struggled, the more exhausted he became. The silence of the hall would amplify the sound of the stones clattering against each other in his mind, a deafening noise that only he could hear. The old master of the monastery, a man named Kenji, had eyes that saw more than the surface of things. He saw the way Kaito's shoulders slumped, even when the boy tried to stand tall. He saw the tightness around Kaito's mouth, a constant clenching against the tide of his own mind. He heard the weariness in Kaito's voice during the morning chants, a subtle drag in the rhythm of the sutras. Kenji had watched the young monk for many weeks, observing his struggle with a quiet, patient compassion. He knew that words of doctrine and complex philosophy would be just more stones for the boy to carry. The lesson Kaito needed was one he had to feel in his own body. One crisp autumn afternoon, Kenji found Kaito in the rock garden. The boy was supposed to be raking the fine white gravel into patterns of flowing water, a practice of mindfulness and concentration. But he stood motionless, his rake held loosely in his hands, his gaze fixed on a large, unmoving boulder at the center of the garden. His face was a mask of frustration. The lines he had raked were hesitant and broken, the patterns disturbed by his own inner turmoil. He had been trying to rake away his thoughts, but with each pull of the rake, a new stone of self-criticism would appear in his mind. The gravel, meant to represent the river of life, felt to him like a field of jagged shards. Kenji approached without a sound, his soft sandals making no impression on the mossy path. He stood beside Kaito for a long moment, simply sharing the silence, breathing the cool, pine-scented air. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not offer any immediate advice. He just stood there, present and calm, a silent mountain of peace next to Kaito's inner storm. Finally, Kaito spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Master, my mind is so heavy. I cannot find peace. I try to clear it, to make it still and empty, but it is full of stones. I carry them all day, and they exhaust me. I do not know how to put them down."
Kenji nodded slowly, his eyes soft with understanding. He looked at the garden, at the stones, both large and small, that were placed with such care, and then he looked at Kaito. "Show me," he said gently. "Show me this weight." Kaito, confused, looked at his own empty hands.
"But master, they are in my mind. They are not real."
"Everything you feel is real, Kaito," the master replied. He gestured to a small gray stone lying near the edge of the raked gravel. It was about the size of a goose egg, smooth and solid. "Pick up that stone," he instructed. Kaito did as he was told. He bent down, and his fingers closed around the cool, dense object. It had a pleasing weight in his palm, a simple, earthly reality. He stood up and held it for the master to see. "Hold it out in front of you," Kenji said, his voice calm and even. "Keep your arms straight." Kaito extended his arm, the stone resting in his open palm. It was easy. The stone was not heavy. His arm was strong. He could hold it like this for a long time. The master stood beside him, silent, his gaze directed towards the distant, purple mountains. The minutes began to stretch. A bird called from a nearby pine tree. The wind whispered through the bamboo grove, a soft, rustling sound. At first, Kaito felt a sense of calm. The simple act of holding the stone was a focus, a relief from the chaos in his head. But after 5 minutes, a dull ache began to creep into his shoulder. His biceps started to tremble slightly. The stone, which had felt so light at first, now seemed to be gaining weight, pressing down on his palm with a surprising force. He tried to ignore the discomfort, to breathe through it, as he had been taught in meditation. He focused on the master's calm profile, on the steady rhythm of his own breathing. After 10 minutes, the ache had become a sharp, burning pain. His arm was shaking noticeably now. His shoulder felt as if it were on fire. The stone in his hand felt like a block of iron, impossibly heavy, pulling his entire body down. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breath was no longer steady. It came in short, strained gasps. He wanted nothing more than to drop the stone, to let his arm fall to his side. But he would not fail this simple test in front of his master. He clenched his jaw and held on, his entire being focused on the single, agonizing task of not letting go. Kenji finally turned his head and looked at Kaito. His eyes were not judging, but full of a deep, knowing kindness. "Tell me, Kaito," he asked softly, "is the stone heavy?"
"Yes, master."
Kaito gritted out through his teeth. "It is very heavy. Has its weight changed since you first picked it up?"
"No, master."
Kaito admitted, his voice strained. "It has not. Then why does it cause you so much pain?" Kenji asked. Kaito looked at the stone, then at his trembling arm, and finally into the
master's clear, calm eyes. The answer was so simple, so obvious, that it felt like a revelation. "Because I have been holding it for so long," he whispered. A gentle smile touched Kenji's lips. "Yes," he said. "The suffering is not in the stone, Kaito. The suffering is in the holding. The longer you hold it, the heavier it becomes. Your thoughts are just like this stone. In themselves, they have no power to harm you. A thought is just a thought. A memory is just a memory. A worry is just a worry. They are light and fleeting. But when you pick them up, when you choose to hold on to them, to carry them with you, to clench your mind around them, that is when they become heavy. That is when they create suffering." He paused, letting his words settle into the young monk's tired mind. "You have been trying to fight the stones, to throw them away. But the fighting is just another way of holding on. The struggle is a clenching of the fist. What would happen if you simply opened your hand?" As Kenji spoke these last words, Kaito's fingers, as if with a will of their own, uncurled. The gray stone fell from his palm, landing with a soft thud on the mossy ground. An immediate, profound wave of relief washed through him. The release was not just in his arm, which he now lowered with a deep sigh, but through his entire body. The fire in his shoulder subsided to a dull throb. The tension in his jaw eased. He took a deep, full breath, the first he felt he had taken all day. His arm was sore, but it was also free. He looked down at the stone resting innocently on the moss. It looked small and harmless. It was just a stone. It had no power, no malice. All the pain had come from his own effort, his own insistence on holding it. He then turned his awareness inward, to the landscape of his mind. A familiar thought arose, the jagged stone of his mistake with the bonsai tree. He felt the habitual urge to grasp it, to examine its sharp edges, to feel the familiar sting of regret. But this time, guided by the master's lesson, he did something different. He did nothing. He simply observed the thought as it appeared. He saw it, not as a part of him, but as a stone lying on the path of his awareness. He did not have to pick it up. He could simply notice it, acknowledge its presence, and let it be. He did not try to push it away. He did not engage with it. He just watched it, and a strange thing happened. Without the energy of his grasping, without the fuel of his struggle, the thought began to lose its solidity. Its sharp edges seemed to soften. It became less like a stone and more like a cloud, a passing shape in the vast sky of his mind. It was still there, but it no longer had weight. It no longer had the power to cause him pain. A sense of quiet wonder filled him. For years he had believed the problem was the content of his mind, the thoughts themselves. He had been trying to change the stones, to break them, to get rid of them. He had never realized that the true problem was the simple unconscious act of carrying them. The solution was not to fight, but to release, not to struggle, but to allow. Kenji placed a gentle hand on Kaito's shoulder. "This is the beginning of your practice, Kaito," he said. "It is not a single act, but a constant, gentle returning. Each time a thought stone appears in your mind, you will feel the old habit to pick it up. In that moment, remember the feeling in your arm. Remember the simple relief of opening your hand. You do not need to empty your mind of stones. The garden of your mind will always have them. You only need to stop carrying them. Let them lie where they fall. Then you will be free to walk the path." Kaito bowed deeply to his master, a bow not of mere formality, but of profound gratitude. For the first time, the movement felt light, effortless. When he straightened up, he looked at the rock garden with new eyes. The white gravel was no longer a field of shards, but a canvas of stillness. The large boulder at the center was no longer a symbol of his immovable problems, but a quiet testament to the power of simply being. He picked up his rake. The wood felt light and balanced in his hands. He took a slow, deep breath and drew the tines through the gravel. The line he made was smooth, continuous, and calm. A thought of worry about the evening meal arose in his mind. He saw it, a small lumpy stone. He felt the old familiar tension, the urge to pick it up. But he remembered. He let his mental hand stay open. He let the stone lie. He returned his attention to the feeling of the rake, the crisp sound it made in the gravel, the cool air on his skin. He continued his work, and for the first time he understood that the path to peace was not in clearing the garden of all its stones, but in learning to rake around them with a light and gentle hand. The weight was not in the world or even in his mind. It was only ever in the holding, and he was at last learning how to let go. As the sun began its slow descent behind the western peaks, casting long, soft shadows across the gravel, Kaito continued his work. The rhythm of the rake became a kind of meditation in itself. Pull, release. Pull, release. The sound was a gentle whisper, a shushing of the world. With each stroke, he felt he was not just smoothing the gravel, but also smoothing the tangled landscape of his own mind. Another thought arose, larger this time. It was the heavy, familiar boulder of his deepest insecurity, the fear that he was not truly suited for the monastic life, that his progress was too slow, that he was disappointing his master. He felt the old powerful gravity of this thought, the immediate tensing in his neck and shoulders, the instinct to grapple with it, to prove it wrong, to wrestle it into submission. His breath hitched, and the rake in his hand suddenly felt clumsy and heavy again. He had almost, without thinking, picked up the heaviest stone of all. But then, the faint, residual ache in his arm served as a gentle reminder. He paused, his rake resting in the white sea of gravel. He closed his eyes for a moment and pictured the boulder in his mind. He did not try to push it away. He did not try to shatter it with logic. He simply looked at it. He acknowledged its presence. He felt its perceived weight, its rough texture, its intimidating size. And then he did what Kenji had taught him. He opened his mental hand. He let the boulder be. He did not have to carry it. He did not have to move it. He could simply leave it where it was and continue his work. He opened his eyes and took a breath. He began to rake again, this time, consciously moving around the space the boulder occupied in his mind. He did not fight it. He accepted it as part of the terrain. And as he did, its power began to wane. It was still there, a great, silent mass in his awareness, but it no longer blocked his path. It was just a feature of the landscape, no more or less significant than the ancient lantern at the garden's edge. By not giving it the energy of his struggle, he starved it of its power over him. From the temple veranda, hidden in the deepening shadows, Master Kenji watched. He saw the boy pause. He saw the subtle return of tension to his frame, and then he saw it dissolve. He saw Kaito's breathing deepen once more, and he saw the lines of the rake become fluid and confident again. A quiet joy warmed the old master's heart. The seed of understanding had been planted. Now, with gentle, patient practice, it would grow. The deep, resonant sound of the evening bell rolled through the monastery, calling the monks from their duties. Its tones seemed to hang in the cool air, vibrating with a profound peace. Kaito completed one final perfect arc in the gravel. He placed the rake carefully back in its holder, his movements unhurried and mindful. He bowed to the garden, a gesture of respect not just to the place, but to the lesson it had given him. As he walked back toward the main hall, the soreness in his arm was a gentle, pulsing echo, a physical mantra reminding him of the freedom in release. For the first time in a very long time, his shoulders felt light. He looked up at the first stars beginning to appear in the indigo sky, and he felt not the weight of his own small world, but the vast, open lightness of the universe itself. The stones were still there, and they always would be, but he no longer had to build his house with them. He could let them be the riverbed, while his own awareness flowed freely over them, clear and untroubled. Part 2. The River of Thoughts. Long after Kaito learned to let his stones lie, in a bustling port city hundreds of miles to the south lived a man named Ren. He was not a monk but a scholar of maps and histories, a man whose life was built from words and ideas. His mind, once his greatest asset, had become his most relentless tormentor. It was not a garden of stones that could be left untended. It was a river, a ceaseless churning torrent of thoughts that swept him along day and night, allowing him no rest. In the morning, before the sun had even touched the horizon, the river would already be at flood stage. Thoughts of the day's tasks, conversations from the day before, worries about finances, and fragments of obscure text he had read years ago would all crash together in a chaotic surge. He would lie in his bed, exhausted before his feet even touched the floor, already drowning in the current. He tried to build a dam. He would sit in a rigid posture and try to force his mind into silence, commanding the river to stop. But this effort was like trying to hold back the ocean with one's bare hands. The pressure would build and build until the dam of his will inevitably shattered, and the thoughts would rush through with even greater force, leaving him gasping and defeated. He tried to divert the river. He would fill his days with frantic activity, taking on more work, engaging in loud and distracting entertainments, hoping to create new channels for the mental energy to flow. But the river was cunning. It simply followed him, its roar a constant undertone to every conversation, its powerful current pulling at him even as he tried to focus on other things. The diversions were like shallow canals that quickly overflowed, returning the flood to its original destructive course. He even tried to poison the river, dulling his mind with strong wine in the evenings, hoping to slow the current enough to find a few hours of peace. But this only made the water murky and treacherous. The thoughts became sluggish and dark, clinging to him like thick mud, and in the morning, the river would return with a vengeance, its waters gray and heavy with regret. Ren grew thin and pale. The world, which he had once studied with such passion, now seemed like a distant, faded tapestry viewed from beneath a great depth of churning water. He heard whispers among his colleagues of a hermit who lived in the remote northern mountains, a man who was said to possess a peace as deep and still as a hidden mountain lake. They said he lived beside the great Silver River and that he knew the secrets of its currents. Desperate for any hope of quiet, Ren sold a few of his precious books, packed a simple bag, and left the city behind, seeking a stillness he had never known. His journey was long and arduous. He traveled through flat, dusty plains that mirrored the emptiness he felt inside, and then into foothills that rose and fell like his own labored breaths. Finally, he entered the great northern forests. Here, the world grew quieter. The air was cool and clean, and the only sounds were the wind in the high pines and the distant call of a hawk. Yet, the river in his mind raged on, its noise a stark and painful contrast to the tranquility around him. After many weeks of walking, heard it, a low, powerful rumble that was not in his head. It was the sound of the great Silver River. He followed the sound, his heart a mix of hope and trepidation, and finally emerged from the dense trees onto a rocky bank. The river was immense, far wider and more powerful than he had imagined. It flowed with an unstoppable, majestic force, its surface a glittering sheet of silver under the midday sun. And there, sitting on a smooth, flat rock near the water's edge, was an old man. His back was straight but relaxed, his simple gray robe blended with the stone, and he was watching the water with a serene, unwavering attention. Ren approached cautiously. The old man, whose name was Jin, turned his head slowly, his eyes as clear and deep as the river itself. There were no questions, no surprise. He seemed to have been expecting him. Ren, in a torrent of words that mirrored the chaos in his own soul, poured out a story. He spoke of the flood of thoughts, the failed dams, the exhaustion, the desperate search for a moment of silence. "Please, master," he begged, his voice cracking with emotion, "teach me how to stop the river. Show me how to make my mind still." Jin listened to the entire story without interruption. His gaze was patient, compassionate. When Ren finally fell silent, spent and empty, the old hermit did not offer a single word of philosophy. He simply gestured with a long, bony finger towards the massive, flowing body of water before them. "That river," Jin said, his voice as calm and steady as the earth beneath them. "Go and stop it." Ren stared at him, bewildered. "Stop the river? But that's impossible. It is too powerful." "You wish to stop the river in your mind," Jin replied evenly. "First, show me you can stop this one." Though he believed it a fool's errand, Ren was desperate enough to obey. He walked to the water's edge and began. First, he tried to build a dam, just as he had in his mind. He gathered heavy stones, wading into the shallows, and piled them one on top of the other. The current was shockingly cold and strong. It pushed against his legs, threatening to sweep him off his feet. For every stone he managed to place, the river would dislodge two, rolling them downstream with casual indifference. The water simply flowed around his pathetic, crumbling wall. Frustrated, he abandoned the dam and waded deeper into the main current. He planted his feet and pushed against the water with his hands, his shoulders, his entire body, as if he could physically hold it back. The river was a living thing, a muscle of immense power. It yielded for a moment and then pressed back, tireless and immense. Ren's own strength faded quickly. His muscles burned, his teeth chattered from the cold, and soon he was driven back, stumbling, to the shore. He even tried shouting at it. He stood on the bank and yelled, pouring all his anger and frustration into the roar of the water, commanding it to cease. The river, in its vast, impersonal grandeur, flowed on, utterly unmoved. Exhausted, soaked, and shivering, Ren finally collapsed on the bank, defeated. The river had not paused for even a single moment. His efforts had been completely, utterly futile. He had only succeeded in tiring himself out. He dragged himself back to the old hermit, who had not moved from his rock. "I cannot do it," Ren said, his voice heavy with failure. "It cannot be done. The river is too strong." Jin nodded, a faint knowing smile on his lips. "Yes," he said, "it is. Now come, sit with me." He gestured to the empty space on the rock beside him. Ren, feeling foolish and tired, sat down. The stone was warm from the sun. For a long time they sat in silence, the only sound the constant, soothing roar of the water. "What am I to do now?" Ren asked, his impatience rising again. "Nothing," said the hermit. "Do not try to stop the river. Do not try to change it. Do not even try to understand it. Just watch it." And so they watched. At first, Ren's mind was as restless as his body had been. He wanted a technique, a secret, a method. Just sitting felt like a waste of time. His inner river of thought was still churning. "This is pointless. What is this old man's game? I should be doing something." He judged the river, thinking it was too loud, too fast. He judged himself for his inability to be still. Jin seemed to notice his agitation. Without looking at him, he said softly, "Look there." He pointed to a single yellow leaf caught in a swirling eddy near the bank. "It spins, but it is still carried forward." A moment later he pointed again. "See how the sunlight catches the spray where the water hits that rock." Slowly, reluctantly, Ren began to follow the hermit's gentle guidance. He stopped thinking about the river and started simply seeing it. He noticed the complex patterns of the currents, the way some parts flowed smooth and fast like polished silk, while others were choppy and white. He saw a long, dark twig rush by, then a cluster of white petals from a mountain flower, then a patch of brown foam. He began to listen, truly listen, to its voice, not just the single overwhelming roar, but the thousand smaller sounds within it, the gurgle of water around stones, the hiss of the spray, the deep, resonant hum of the main channel. They sat like this for the rest of the day. As the sun began to set, painting the water in hues of orange and pink, Ren realized something strange had happened. The river of his mind had not stopped. It was still flowing, but it had grown quieter. Its desperate, chaotic crashing had subsided into a more gentle, steady murmur. His attention, held not by force but by simple, curious observation of the river outside, had given the river inside less energy to rage. The next day, Jin did not even have to speak. Ren went and sat on the rock, and he began to watch. He saw the river in the morning mist, mysterious and gray. He saw it at noon, bright and dazzling. He saw the life it carried, a fish leaping, a dragonfly darting across its surface, a bird dipping its wings for a drink. He watched for hours, and the hours melted into a seamless flow. A profound insight began to dawn in Ren's heart, as gentle and clear as the morning light. The river in his mind was exactly like the river before him. It had its own nature. It was not his enemy. It was simply a process, a flow of energy. His mistake, his entire life's mistake, had been to jump into the water. He had been identifying with every single thought, every piece of debris that floated by. When a dark, painful memory appeared, a sharp stone in the current, he would grab onto it, wrestling with it, trying to force it under the surface. And in doing so, he would be pulled down by its weight. When a bright, happy thought appeared, a flower petal, he would desperately cling to it, trying to keep it from floating away. And in his clinging, he would create anxiety, fearing the moment it would pass from his grasp. He was constantly struggling in the middle of the current, being battered and thrown about, convinced that the river itself was the source of his suffering. He had been wrong. The suffering was not the river. The suffering was the struggle. Now, sitting on the bank, he could see a thought of anxiety appear, like a muddy twig in the water. He no longer felt the compulsion to jump in after it. He could simply observe it. Ah, anxiety, he would note. And then he would watch as it floated by and eventually disappeared downstream. A thought of a future plan would appear, a sturdy log. He could see it, acknowledge its purpose, and let it go on its way. He did not need to ride it or fight it. He was not the river. He was not the debris in the water. He was the silent, still awareness on the bank. The bank is not harmed by the river. The bank does not judge the river. It does not care if the water is clear or muddy, fast or slow. It simply provides the space for the river to be itself. It holds the river, but it is not swept away by it. A deep, quiet peace began to settle over Ren. A peace he had never imagined possible. It was not an empty, silent peace. The river of his mind was still flowing, thoughts still arose, but they no longer had power over him. They were just sounds, just patterns on the water. He was the watcher, and in that watching, there was a vast and profound stillness. One evening, as the moon rose casting a perfect, shimmering reflection on the dark water, Jin finally spoke again. "You came here to learn how to stop the river," he said. Ren smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached his eyes. "I've learned something better," he replied. "I've learned that the river does not need to be stopped. It only needs to be allowed to flow. The peace I was looking for was not in a silent river, but here on the quiet bank." The old hermit nodded, his work complete. Ren stayed by the river for many more weeks, not as a student struggling with a lesson, but simply as a man at home in his own being. He learned that the bank of awareness was his true nature, always present, always still, no matter how fiercely the currents of life might flow. And when it was finally time to return to the world, he carried not a burdensome secret or a difficult technique, but the simple, unshakable peace of the silent watcher, forever resting on the riverbank of his own mind. When Ren finally decided to leave the mountain, his departure was as quiet as his arrival. He bowed deeply to Jin, a gesture that conveyed a gratitude far beyond what words could express. The old hermit simply nodded, his eyes reflecting the endless flow of the river, a silent blessing and farewell. As Ren walked back through the forest, the world seemed transformed. It was, of course, the same world. The pines were just as tall, the air just as cool, the earth just as firm beneath his feet. What had changed was the one who was perceiving it. The roar of the river in his mind was gone. In its place was a gentle, steady murmur, a background sound that was no longer a threat. It was simply the sound of his mind being alive, just as the rustle of leaves was the sound of the wind being alive. He found that he could now hear the other, subtler sounds he had missed before. The delicate snap of a twig under a deer's hoof, the intricate song of a hidden warbler, the low hum of insects in a patch of sun. His awareness, no longer consumed by the inner noise, had expanded to embrace the world around him. His journey back to the city was a different kind of meditation. He walked not with a destination as a desperate goal, but with each step as its own arrival. When his mind presented a thought of the city, a memory of a crowded street, a worry about his neglected scholarly work, he saw it clearly, like a boat appearing on the horizon of his awareness. He did not need to get on the boat. He could simply watch it approach, see it for what it was, and let it sail on by. He remained on the shore. Upon returning to the port city, the initial shock of its noise and chaos was immense. The clamor of merchants, the clatter of wagon wheels on stone, the cacophony of 1,000 conversations. It was a stark contrast to the mountain's peace. In his old life, this external chaos would have instantly churned his internal river into a raging flood. He would have felt assaulted, overwhelmed, and would have retreated into the tense, fortress-like state of his own mind, which was no fortress at all, but a prison. Now, something remarkable happened. He stood for a moment on the edge of the main thoroughfare, and he applied the lesson of the river. He did not resist the noise. He did not judge it. He did not wish it were different. He simply listened. He sat on the metaphorical riverbank of his awareness and watched the sensory information flow past. The sharp cry of a gull, the deep clang of a ship's bell, the heated argument of two drivers, they were all just pieces of debris on a much larger river of sound. They flowed into his awareness and then flowed out again. They did not need to disturb the stillness of the bank. He returned to his small house, which was dusty and smelled of stale paper. He began the simple task of cleaning. As he wiped the dust from his books and maps, his mind, as it was its nature to do, produced thoughts. I have been gone so long. I have so much work to catch up on. What will my patrons think? The old habit of anxiety, the familiar tensing of the gut, began to stir. But it was weaker now, a ghost of its former power. He paused his cleaning and sat on a simple wooden stool. He closed his eyes and brought the image of the great silver river to his mind. He remembered its effortless, unstoppable flow. He remembered the solid, unmoving warmth of the rock beneath him. He was the rock. He was the bank. The thoughts were just the water. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He did not engage with the worries. He let them be twigs and leaves carried on the current. After a few moments, the familiar peace returned, a quiet space that held the noise, both internal and external, without being disturbed by it. The stillness he had found was not dependent on a silent mountain. It was portable. It was here, inside him, available at any moment. It was the simple, profound act of choosing to sit on the bank rather than leaping into the water. Ren picked up his cloth and continued to clean, his movements now calm and measured, his mind as vast and accommodating as the sky above the ever-flowing river. Part 3. The Rhythm of the Breath. In a small village nestled in a valley famous for its fine clay, there lived a potter named Haru. He was a man whose hands spoke a language older than words. From a lump of wet, gray earth, he could coax the most elegant and graceful forms. Tea bowls so light they felt like captured air. Vases whose curves echoed the gentle slope of the hills surrounding his home. People came from far and wide for his work, not just for its beauty, but for the palpable sense of peace that seemed to be fired into the very clay itself. Holding one of Haru's bowls was said to calm the most troubled of hearts. Yet, there was a time when Haru's own heart was anything but calm. In his youth, he had been a vessel of restless energy. His mind, like Ren's, was a river, but it was a shallow, fast-moving one, constantly agitated, skipping and chattering over the stones of 1,000 anxieties and ambitions. He wanted to be the greatest potter in the province. He wanted his fame to spread to the capital. He wanted to create a glaze of a blue so perfect it would rival the sky. These desires were a constant, nagging thirst, a fire that drove him, but also consumed him. This inner turmoil manifested in his hands. He would sit at his wheel, his foot pumping the treadle with a frantic, uneven rhythm. He would center the clay, but his own center was missing. His touch was impatient. He would try to force the shape, to pull the walls of the pot up too quickly, and they would inevitably collapse, slumping into a formless, muddy ruin. Or, if he did manage to create a form, it would be stiff, lifeless, bearing the imprint of his own tension. His workshop was filled with these failures, a graveyard of cracked, warped, and soulless pots. Each failure fueled his frustration, and his frustration made his hands even more unsteady. He was trapped in a cycle of striving and disappointment. His teacher, an old, wizened potter named Etsuko, would watch him with a quiet, knowing gaze. She rarely spoke. Her own movements at the wheel were a kind of silent poetry. She did not seem to be working the clay, but rather dancing with it. Her hands were firm, but gentle, guiding rather than commanding. The clay seemed to rise under her touch, as if by its own volition, blossoming into a perfect, harmonious form. Her workshop was a place of deep, meditative quiet, broken only by the soft whir of the wheel and the gentle squelch of wet clay. One afternoon, after Haru had thrown down a collapsed pot with a curse, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Etsuko finally came over to his wheel. She did not look at the ruined clay. She looked at Haru. "You are fighting the clay," she said, her voice soft but clear, like the chime of a small bell. "But the clay is not your enemy. Your enemy is your own hurried breath." Haru looked up, confused. "My breath? What has my breath to do with pottery?" "Everything," she replied. She took a fresh lump of clay and placed it on the center of her own wheel. She did not begin to pump the treadle. Instead, she sat, her back straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap, and she closed her eyes. Haru watched, mystified. She simply sat there, breathing. Her breaths were long, slow, and deep. He could see the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, a rhythm as steady and natural as the tides. The air in the workshop seemed to grow still around her, charged with a quiet energy. After several minutes, she opened her eyes. they were clear and calm. "The clay feels everything," she said. "It feels your tension. It feels your impatience. It feels the frantic beat of your heart. Before your hands touch the clay, your breath must touch your own center. Find the rhythm that is always with you, the anchor in the storm of your thoughts. Then, let that rhythm guide your hands." She began to work. Her foot moved the treadle with a slow, steady pulse, and the wheel began to turn. The rhythm of her foot matched the rhythm of her breathing. As she wet her hands and centered the clay, her movements were in perfect sync with her exhalations. A long, slow breath out as she pressed the clay down and in, finding its heart. A calm, steady breath in as she prepared to open the form. Haru watched, mesmerized. It was as if her breath were a silent, invisible hand working in concert with her physical ones. The pull, as she raised the walls of the bowl, was timed with a single, long, controlled exhalation. There was no struggle, no force. The clay rose smoothly, evenly, as if it were breathing with her. The form that emerged was not just beautiful, it was alive. It possessed a grace and stillness that seemed to be a direct expression of her own inner state. "The breath is the bridge," she said, her hands still gently caressing the spinning bowl. "It is the bridge between your mind and your body. When your mind is racing, full of ambition and fear, your breath becomes shallow and fast. Your body becomes tense, and the clay will always tell the truth. But when you bring your attention to your breath, the mind has no choice but to slow down. It cannot race ahead when its anchor is in the present moment. And when the mind slows, the body relaxes. The hands become sensitive, intelligent. They learn to listen to the clay instead of shouting at it." She left him then to absorb the lesson. Haru sat at his wheel for a long time without touching the clay. He simply tried to do as she had done. He closed his eyes and brought his attention to his breath. At first, it was difficult. His mind, so used to constant activity, rebelled. Thoughts of his failures, his ambitions, his frustrations, all clamored for his attention. And he noticed, for the first time, how his breath reflected this inner chaos. It was shallow, held high in his chest, and uneven. Remembering Etsuko's example, he did not fight the thoughts. He simply let them be, like clouds passing in the sky, and gently, again and again, he returned his focus to the simple, physical sensation of the air entering his nostrils, filling his lungs, and then gently leaving again. He felt the coolness of the in-breath and the warmth of the out-breath. He felt the subtle expansion of his belly and chest. Slowly, painstakingly, something began to shift. As he continued to focus on this simple, repetitive rhythm, the storm of his thoughts began to quiet. The spaces between the thoughts grew longer. His breath, in turn, began to deepen, to find its own, natural, unforced rhythm. It was like a frantic, choppy stream gradually slowing and deepening, its surface becoming smooth and clear. A feeling of calm, a feeling he had not experienced in years, began to spread through his body. The tight knot in his stomach loosened. The tension in his shoulders eased. He was not trying to be calm. He was simply breathing, and the calm was an effortless consequence. He stayed like this for what felt like a long time. When he finally opened his eyes, the world seemed different. The light slanting through the workshop window seemed softer. The familiar smell of damp earth was richer. He felt present in his own body, in his own workshop, in a way he had never been before. He took a new piece of clay. Its cool, yielding texture felt new and alive in his hands. He placed it on the wheel, and before doing anything else, he found his breath again. He closed his eyes for a moment, connecting with that slow, steady, internal rhythm. Then he began to pump the treadle, matching its pace to his breathing. Inhale, exhale, push, release. When he touched the clay, his hands were different. They were no longer the hands of a frustrated striver. They were the hands of a listener. He did not impose his will on the clay. He allowed his breath to guide his touch. On the long, slow out-breath, he centered the clay, feeling its spinning mass find its own point of stillness under his palms. On the in-breath, he paused, feeling the energy gather. On the next out-breath, he opened the form, his thumbs sinking gently into the center. He was no longer thinking about the perfect blue glaze or the praise of patrons in the capital. He was not thinking at all. His entire awareness was focused on the nexus of breath, hands, and clay. The world outside this trinity ceased to exist. There was only the steady rhythm of his breathing, the whir of the wheel, and the feeling of the cool earth rising between his fingers. The walls of the pot rose as if by magic. They were thin and even, yet strong. He was not pulling them up, he was breathing them up. The form that emerged was one he had never been able to create before. It was simple, humble, and yet it possessed a profound sense of balance and peace. It was a perfect, silent reflection of the stillness he had finally found within himself. When he was finished, he stopped the wheel and looked at the bowl. It was beautiful, but it was more than that. It was true. A tear traced a path through the clay dust on his cheek. It was not a tear of frustration or sadness, but of a deep and quiet joy. He had spent years trying to force beauty into the clay when all along the beauty was waiting to be revealed through the simple act of coming home to himself. From that day on, Haru's practice changed completely. Every session at the wheel began with a period of sitting, of finding the anchor of his breath. The breath became his teacher, his guide, his constant companion. When he felt frustration rising, he would notice his breath shortening, and he would pause, returning to the slow, deep rhythm until the frustration dissolved. When his mind wandered to future ambitions, he would feel his breathing become uneven, and he would gently guide his attention back to the simple sensation of the air flowing in and out, bringing him back to the present moment, the only place where creation was possible. His pots became infused with this practice. They were no longer just objects of utility or decoration. They were vessels of stillness. People who held them could feel the calm rhythm that had gone into their making. They would hold a simple tea bowl in their hands and, without knowing why, find their own breathing slowing down, their own minds growing quiet. The potter's piece had become transferable, a silent teaching offered through the medium of earth and fire. Haru never became the most famous potter in the province. His ambition for fame had dissolved, replaced by a simple devotion to his craft and his practice. But he became known as the potter of the peaceful heart, and he learned that the greatest masterpiece he could ever create was not a pot of perfect blue, but a moment of perfect, breathable stillness. The rhythm he had sought was not in the turning of the wheel or the applause of the world, but in the gentle, constant, life-giving pulse of his own breath, the quietest and most profound teacher of all. Haru's discovery transformed not just his work, but his entire life. The rhythm of the breath, once a specific technique for the potter's wheel, began to permeate every aspect of his day. He found that the same principle applied to the most mundane of tasks. When he was chopping vegetables for his evening meal, he would notice if his mind was racing ahead to the next task. The knife strokes would become hurried, jerky, and he would feel a subtle tension in his hand. This was his cue. He would pause, take a single conscious breath, and then continue, syncing the rise and fall of the knife with the steady rhythm of his breathing. The simple act of chopping a carrot became a meditation, a practice of presence. The food, he was sure, even tasted better, infused with this calm attention. When he swept the floor of his small workshop, he no longer saw it as a chore to be rushed through. He saw it as another opportunity to practice. He would match the long, sweeping motion of the broom to his out-breath, and the gathering pull to his in-breath. Sweep out, breathe out. Gather in, breathe in. The dust and clay shavings were not a mess to be conquered, but simply elements in a graceful, rhythmic dance. He found a deep satisfaction in these simple, repetitive tasks that had once been sources of impatience. The breath was the thread that stitched the moments of his day into a single, seamless fabric of mindfulness. He began to notice the breath in others, too. When a merchant came to his workshop, agitated and speaking quickly about an order, Haru could see the man's shallow, rapid breathing, the tension held in his shoulders. In the past, Haru would have absorbed this anxious energy, feeling a pressure to match the merchant's pace. Now, he remained anchored in his own calm rhythm. He would listen patiently, his own breath slow and deep, and he found that his stillness had a subtle, calming effect on his visitor. The merchant's speech would slow. His shoulders would drop slightly, and the transaction would conclude with a sense of mutual respect and ease rather than hurried pressure. His quiet presence became a silent offering of peace to everyone he met. One spring, a apprentice named Kenta came to study with him. Kenta was much like Haru had been in his youth, talented, ambitious, and deeply frustrated. His hands were skilled, but his spirit was restless. He would work with a furious intensity, and his pots, though technically proficient, were brittle and lacked soul. Haru watched him for many days, seeing his own past reflected in the young man's clenched jaw and shallow breathing. He did not lecture Kenta on philosophy or technique. One morning, instead of leading him to the potter's wheel, Haru took him to the small bamboo grove behind the workshop. The sun was just rising, and the air was cool and still. "We will not work with clay today," Haru said. "Today, we will work with air." He instructed Kenta to simply stand, his feet planted firmly on the earth, and to listen. At first, Kenta was fidgety, his mind already back in the workshop, thinking of the forms he wanted to create. "What are we listening for?" Kenta asked, his impatience evident. "Listen to the silence," Haru replied. "And inside the silence, listen to the sound of your own breathing." They stood there for a long time. Kenta's mind protested. This was a waste of time. He needed to be practicing, improving, but out of respect for his master, he remained. Gradually, as the minutes passed, the outer world began to assert itself. He heard the rustle of the bamboo leaves in the gentle morning breeze. He noticed that their movements seemed to have a rhythm, a soft, whispering sigh. "The bamboo breathes," Haru said softly, as if reading the boy's thoughts. "The whole world breathes. The wind, the trees, the earth itself. It is all one rhythm. You have been trying to create from your own small, hurried rhythm. You must learn to join the larger breath." Haru guided Kenta to place a hand on his own belly. "Feel the breath here," he instructed. "Not in your head, not in your ambition. Feel it in your center. This is your anchor. This is where your true strength as a potter lies." For an hour, they did nothing but stand and breathe. Kenta, for the first time, felt the deep, calming movement in his own body. He felt his frantic thoughts begin to settle like silt in a still pond. He felt the tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying begin to melt away. He felt a connection to the rustling bamboo, to the solid earth beneath his feet, as if they were all part of one single, breathing organism. When they returned to the workshop, Haru said nothing more. He simply nodded toward Kenta's wheel. The young apprentice sat down, but before he reached for the clay, he paused. He closed his eyes and took a few long, slow breaths, finding that quiet center he had just discovered. When he finally placed his hands on the clay, they were different hands. They were patient. They were listening. The pot he created that morning was unlike any he had made before. It was not perfect in its symmetry, but it was perfectly alive. It had a softness, a yielding quality, a sense of quiet grace. When Kenta lifted it from the wheel, he looked at it with wonder. It felt as though it had not been made by him, but had simply emerged from the stillness. He looked at Haru, his eyes full of a new understanding. Haru smiled. "Today," he said, "you did not make a pot. You allowed a pot to be made. The breath was the potter. You were simply the hands." This became the foundation of all of Haru's teaching. The first lesson was never about clay. It was always about air. He taught his students that the space within the bowl was just as important as the walls that formed it, and that this inner space was created by the stillness of the potter's own mind. The breath was the tool that shaped this inner space. It carved away the unnecessary tension, the frantic striving, leaving only the pure, present, creative moment. The rhythm of the breath was the heartbeat of the universe, and by attuning to it, they could bring not just clay, but their very lives into a state of beautiful, living harmony. Part 4. Listening to the silence. Far from Haru's valley, secluded on a remote peninsula where granite cliffs met the restless sea, stood the monastery of Shio-in, the temple of the listening tide. It was not famous for its gilded statues or ancient scriptures, but for something far more elusive: its silence. Pilgrims and seekers who journeyed there spoke of a quiet so profound that it seemed to have a substance of its own. A silence that could wash over a person and cleanse the mind of its relentless noise. A young musician named Akari, whose life was a world of sound, heard these tales and was deeply intrigued. Akari was a master of the koto, the long Japanese zither. Her fingers could dance across its 13 strings, coaxing from them melodies that could evoke the sorrow of autumn rain or the joy of a spring festival. Music was her language, her breath, her very being. But lately, she had found no peace in it. The world of sound had become overwhelming. In the city, the constant clatter of carts, the shouts of vendors, the endless chatter of people. It all felt like a harsh, abrasive noise that grated on her spirit. Even her own music, once a source of solace, now felt like a part of the problem. She would practice for hours, striving for technical perfection. But the notes felt hollow, lacking a certain depth she couldn't name. The silence between the notes, which she knew was the soul of music, seemed to have vanished from her life. Her mind was a constant cacophony of melodies, critiques, and worries about her next performance. She longed for a true and total quiet, a place where the world of sound would finally cease, believing that only then could she find rest. And so, she made the long journey to Shio-in, seeking an absence of sound. The final stage of the journey was by a small, rocking boat. As the mainland faded into mist, the sounds of the city were replaced by the cry of gulls and the rhythmic wash of the waves against the hull. This was already a quieter world, but Akari's mind was still loud, replaying complex musical passages, anticipating her arrival. When the boat landed in a small, sheltered cove, a single, elderly monk was waiting. He did not speak, but simply smiled and bowed, gesturing for her to follow. They walked up a steep, winding path carved into the cliffside. The only sounds were their soft footsteps on the stone, the sigh of the wind through stunted, salt-twisted pines, and the ever-present deep rumble of the sea below. The monastery itself was a collection of simple, weathered wooden buildings, their silvered timbers seeming to have grown out of the rock itself. There was no grand gate, no ornate carvings. Its beauty was one of austere simplicity, of harmony with its rugged surroundings. As Akari stepped into the central courtyard, she was struck by the quiet. It was deeper than any she had ever experienced. There were no voices, no bells, no chanting. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. This, she thought with a surge of relief, was the silence she had been seeking. The old monk, whose name she later learned was Soseki, showed her to a small, bare room with a single window overlooking the sea. Through gestures, he indicated that she was to rest. For the first day, Akari reveled in the absence of noise. She sat for hours, just listening to the nothingness. It was a balm to her frayed nerves. The constant hum of the city faded from her memory. The melodies in her head began to quiet. But by the second day, a strange restlessness began to set in. The silence, which had at first felt like a comforting blanket, now began to feel empty, vast, and even a little unnerving. Her mind, deprived of its usual external distractions, began to generate its own noise with a renewed vigor. Worries she hadn't thought of in years surfaced. Snippets of annoying folk songs she had heard as a child played on a loop. The silence, it turned out, was not empty at all. It was a powerful amplifier for the noise she had been carrying within her all along. Her frustration grew. She had come all this way to find silence, only to discover that she was the source of the noise. She began to notice sounds she had previously ignored, and they became irritants. The creak of a floorboard in the corridor, the distant caw of a crow, the maddeningly persistent drip of water from an eave after a brief shower. Each tiny sound was a violation of the perfect silence she craved. The most persistent sound was the sea. It was never truly quiet. There was always the low, resonant boom of the waves crashing against the cliffs, the hiss of the receding water pulling at the pebbles, the gentle lapping in the cove. It was a sound so constant that it had at first been part of the silence, but now it became the focus of her agitation. How could this be a place of silence when this constant, powerful roar was its foundation? Unable to bear the confines of her room any longer, she sought out Soseki. She found him in a small hall, mending a fishing net. His movements were slow, precise, and full of a peaceful attention. Akari, breaking the unspoken rule of the monastery, began to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush of frustration. "Master, I came here seeking silence, but I cannot find it. My mind is louder than ever. And this place, it is not silent. The sea is always making noise, the wind, the birds, there is sound everywhere. How can you call this a silent place?" Soseki paused in his work. He looked at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a gentle amusement. He did not answer her question directly. Instead, he put down his net and gestured for her to follow him. He led her out of the hall and along a narrow path that hugged the cliff edge. The wind was stronger here, and the sound of the sea was immense, a physical presence that vibrated in her bones. They came to a small cave, little more than a hollow in the rock face, just above the churning water. Soseki gestured for her to enter. Inside, the roar of the ocean was deafening. The sound waves seemed to bounce off the rock walls, creating a chaotic, overwhelming thunder. It was the opposite of silence. Akari put her hands over her ears, but it did little to block out the noise. Soseki sat down on a smooth rock inside the cave, seemingly unperturbed. He closed his eyes, and his face took on an expression of deep, peaceful concentration. He motioned for Akari to sit beside him. Reluctantly, she did. Her whole being felt assaulted by the sound. She wanted to scream, to run. How could the old monk bear it? "Listen," Soseki said, his voice barely audible above the din. "Listen to what?" Akari shouted back. "There is nothing but noise." "Listen to the silence," he repeated, a little louder, but with the same unshakable calm. Akari thought he must be mad, but she had come this far, and there was a certainty in his demeanor that held her there. She closed her eyes, her body tense with resistance. She tried to block out the sound, to find some quiet space inside the chaos. But the more she resisted, the more overwhelming the noise became. It was a physical force, a wall of sound pressing in on her. Then she remembered the potter, Haru's lesson about the breath, a story she had heard from a traveler. She had dismissed it then, but now, in her desperation, she decided to try it. She stopped fighting. She stopped trying to block out the sound. She let her hands fall into her lap and focused on the simple, physical sensation of her own breathing. In, out, in, out. Slowly, as she anchored her attention in this internal rhythm, a subtle shift began to occur. Her resistance to the sound started to soften. Instead of fighting the roar of the sea, she simply allowed it to be there. She let the sound waves wash over her, just as the real waves were washing over the rocks below. She stopped labeling it noise. It was just sound. It was the voice of the ocean. As she continued to sit and breathe, her listening began to change. It became more refined, more spacious. She was no longer hearing one single monolithic roar. She began to discern the individual components within the larger sound. She could hear the deep, percussive boom as a large wave struck the cliff face. She could hear the long, drawn-out hiss of the water as it retreated through the pebbles on the shore. She could hear the higher-pitched splash and spray as the water was thrown into the air. She could even hear the subtle groaning and creaking sounds from within the rock itself, a sound of immense pressure and timelessness. The sound was no longer a chaotic wall. It had become a complex, multi-layered symphony. It was powerful, yes, but it was also full of texture, rhythm, and a wild, untamable beauty. She was no longer just hearing the sound. She was listening to it. And then she discovered the most remarkable thing of all. She began to hear the spaces between the sounds. There was a tiny, fractional pause between the end of one wave's hiss and the beginning of the next one's boom. There was a momentary quiet after a splash, before the water droplets fell back into the sea. These were not absences of sound. They were intervals, moments of deep, resonant potential. They were the silence that held the sound. This was the silence Soseki had spoken of. It was not an emptiness. It was a presence. It was the vast, silent canvas upon which all sounds were painted. Without this underlying silence, sound itself could not exist. It was the silence between the strings of her koto, the very thing that gave the notes their meaning and their power. A profound sense of peace settled over Akari, a peace she could feel even in the midst of the ocean's thunder. The silence was not out there, somewhere to be found by escaping the world. It was right here, always. It was the space of awareness in which all experience, including sound, arose and passed away. The noise of her own mind had been her resistance to the sounds of the world. By accepting the sounds, by listening to them with an open and non-judgmental awareness, the inner noise had dissolved. She opened her eyes and looked at Soseki. He was smiling, his eyes open and watching her. He had known this would happen. He had not given her a teaching. He had given her an experience. They walked back to the monastery in the fading light. The world was transformed for Akari. The cry of a gull was no longer an intrusion. It was a sharp, clear brushstroke of sound on the vast canvas of quiet. The creak of a floorboard was a small, intimate note in the symphony of the present moment. Even the roar of the sea was now a comforting, powerful mantra, the deep, rhythmic breathing of the world itself. She returned to her koto the next day, but she approached it differently. Before she played a single note, she sat with the instrument for a long time, just listening. She listened to the silence in the room. She listened to the deep, resonant silence held within the wood of the instrument itself. When she finally placed her fingers on the strings, her touch was different. It was lighter, more attentive. She played, and the music that emerged was unlike any she had ever created. Each note was clear, pure, and distinct, like a single, perfectly formed stone dropped into a still pond. But the true magic was in the spaces between the notes. The silences were no longer empty gaps. They were charged with energy and meaning. They were as much a part of the music as the notes themselves. The melody seemed to rise out of a deep and profound quiet, and to return to it. Her music was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation with silence. Akari understood then that true silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. It was an inner stillness that could hold the loudest noises without being disturbed. It was the calm at the heart of the storm, the quiet bank of the roaring river, the potter's steady breath. She had come to Shio-in to escape the world of sound, but she left, having learned how to truly hear it for the first time. And in doing so, she had finally found the peace she was looking for, not in a silent world, but in her own silent, listening heart. Akari stayed at Shio-in for the remainder of the season, but her days were no longer spent in a desperate search for quiet. Instead, they became a deep exploration of listening. She would spend hours just sitting on the cliffs, not in meditation, but in a state of open, receptive awareness. She learned to listen not just with her ears, but with her whole body. She could feel the vibration of the waves through the soles of her feet. She could feel the subtle shift in the wind's tone as it moved from the open sea to the narrow ravines of the peninsula. She began to perceive the world as a vast, interconnected field of vibration. A single, complex piece of music that was playing itself at every moment. Her relationship with the monks, though conducted almost entirely without words, deepened. She began to understand that their silence was not a vow of abstention, but a practice of profound communication. A shared glance, a simple gesture of passing a bowl of tea, a mutual pause to watch a hawk circling overhead. These moments were filled with a richness and clarity that words often obscured. They were listening to each other, to the moment, and their shared silence was a space of deep connection. One day, Soseki led her to the monastery's bell tower. It was a simple, rustic structure, holding a single enormous bronze bell. Its surface was green with age and patina. Soseki did not ring the bell. Instead, he took a small, soft mallet and gently tapped its rim. A low, almost inaudible hum emerged from the great bronze vessel. "The bell is always singing," Soseki said, one of his rare utterances. "Even when it is not struck, you only need to be quiet enough to hear it." Akari placed her hand on the cool metal. She could feel the faintest vibration, a deep, resonant frequency that was the bell's essential nature. It was the sound of its own being. This, she realized, was like the silence she had discovered. It was the fundamental tone of existence, the quiet hum beneath all the louder, more obvious noises of the world. The goal was not to stop the noises, but to attune one's own listening to this deeper, ever-present song. When the time came for her to leave, her farewell was as wordless as her arrival. She bowed deeply to Soseki at the cove, and he bowed in return. As her boat pulled away, she did not look back with sadness or longing. She sat, facing the open sea, and she listened. She heard the creak of the oarlocks, the call of the gulls, the whisper of the wind, and the deep, rhythmic breathing of the waves. She heard the quiet hum of her own being, and she knew that the silence of Shioin was not something she was leaving behind. It was something she was carrying with her, a vast and peaceful space within her own heart. Returning to the city was no longer a jarring experience. It was simply a change in the music. The city's cacophony was now just a different kind of symphony, more complex, more dissonant perhaps, but still held within the same all-encompassing silence. She could walk through the most crowded market, and by focusing on the anchor of her breath and the vastness of her inner quiet, she could remain centered and at peace. The noise of the world no longer had the power to disturb the silence of her listening. She began to perform her music again, but her concerts were transformed. She would begin by sitting in silence for a full minute, inviting the audience to join her, to arrive in the present moment together. When she played, the music flowed from this shared stillness. It was more spacious, more profound. People who listened said that her music did something more than entertain. It healed. It seemed to quiet the noise in their own minds, to lead them to a place of inner peace they had forgotten existed. Akari had learned that the greatest gift a musician could offer was not the sound of her notes, but the silence from which they were born. She had become a master, not just of the koto, but of the sacred and profound art of listening. Part 5. The Empty Teacup. In the heart of the capital, where the emperor's palace cast a long shadow over a city of relentless ambition, lived a renowned scholar named Professor Ishikawa. His house was not so much a home as it was a library, a fortress built of books and scrolls. The air inside was thick with the scent of aging paper, ink, and the faint, dry smell of dust from 100 forgotten provinces. Ishikawa was a man who had conquered the world of ideas. He could recite the ancient poets from memory, debate the subtlest points of Confucian ethics, and trace the lineage of every noble family back for centuries. His mind was a vast and intricate palace of knowledge, with every room perfectly ordered, every fact catalogued and cross-referenced. He was respected, even feared for the sharpness of his intellect. Other scholars would come to him to settle disputes, and he would dissect their arguments with the precision of a surgeon, leaving them humbled and in awe of his erudition. Yet in the quiet hours of the night, when the city slept and the only sound was the rustle of pages as he turned them, a profound and hollow ache would settle in his heart. His knowledge, for all its breadth and depth, felt like a collection of beautiful, polished stones that offered no nourishment. He had maps of 1,000 rivers, but he had never known the feeling of cool water on his skin. He had treatises on happiness, but he had never known a moment of simple, unburdened peace. His mind, the source of his fame, was also his prison. It was never quiet. It was a tireless machine, constantly analyzing, comparing, judging, and formulating opinions. When he looked at a cherry blossom, he did not see its fleeting, fragile beauty. He saw a symbol, a subject of countless poems, a botanical specimen with a Latin name. The direct experience of the world was always filtered through the thick, complex screen of his accumulated knowledge. This constant mental activity was a form of anxiety, a deep-seated restlessness that left him perpetually unsatisfied, always seeking the next book, the next idea that would finally fill the emptiness inside him. He began to hear stories of a Zen master named Ryokan, who lived a simple, almost reclusive life in a small temple in the distant mountains. They said Ryokan possessed a wisdom that could not be found in books. They said his presence alone could quiet a troubled mind. Ishikawa was skeptical. To him, wisdom was knowledge, and knowledge was contained in texts. This master, he assumed, was likely an uneducated rustic whose reputation was built on the superstitions of simple folk. Nevertheless, a seed of curiosity was planted. Perhaps, Ishikawa thought, this Zen was a philosophical system he had not yet fully mastered. He would go to this master Ryokan, not as a student, but as a fellow intellectual. He would engage him in a scholarly debate, discuss the sutras, and add this Zen wisdom to his collection, another well-appointed room in the palace of his mind. With this intention, he packed his finest robes, a selection of classical texts to quote from, and set out for the mountains. The journey itself was an irritation to him. The rough paths, the simple food at rural inns, the unlettered peasants he encountered, it was all a crude interruption of his refined intellectual life. As he walked, his mind was busy. He rehearsed his arguments. He formulated questions about the nature of emptiness and the paradoxes of the koans. He was preparing for a battle of wits, and he intended to win. After several days of travel, he finally arrived at the temple. It was nothing like the grand monasteries of the capital. It was a small, humble structure of weathered wood, nestled among ancient cedar trees. There was no gatekeeper, no acolytes rushing about. The only sign of life was an old man in a simple patched robe, who was slowly and mindfully sweeping fallen leaves in the courtyard. The man's movements were so absorbed, so full of a quiet grace, that he seemed to be a part of the landscape itself. Ishikawa, accustomed to being announced and received with formality, strode into the courtyard and cleared his throat. "I am Professor Ishikawa from the capital," he announced, his voice sounding loud and harsh in the stillness. "I have come to see Master Ryokan to discuss the principles of Zen." The old man stopped sweeping. He leaned on his bamboo broom and looked at Ishikawa. His face was a landscape of wrinkles, and his eyes were as clear and deep as a mountain spring. He smiled, a simple, welcoming smile that held no trace of awe or intimidation. "I am Ryokan," he said, his voice gentle. "The leaves can wait. You have come a long way. You must be thirsty. Please, come in for some tea." Ishikawa was slightly taken aback by the man's ordinariness. He had expected a more commanding presence, a more formal reception. Still, he followed the master into the temple. They entered a small, clean room. A charcoal brazier glowed in the corner, and a simple iron kettle was simmering softly upon it, its gentle song the only sound in the room. There were no bookshelves, no scrolls on the walls. There was only a single, simple flower arrangement in a bamboo vase. They sat on the tatami mats. Before Ryokan could even begin to prepare the tea, Ishikawa launched into his purpose. "Master," he began, "I have dedicated my life to the study of the great texts. I have read the Diamond Sutra and the Lotus Sutra. I have studied the teachings of Bodhidharma and the patriarchs. I find the concept of mu, or nothingness, to be a fascinating philosophical problem. However, its practical application seems paradoxical. How can one strive for a state of no striving? How can the mind, which is the tool of understanding, be used to transcend itself?" He spoke for a long time, his voice filling the small, quiet room. He quoted texts. He compared different schools of Buddhist thought. He laid out his own elaborate theories. He was not asking questions so much as he was delivering a lecture, demonstrating the vastness of his own knowledge. He was, in effect, showing the master how full his mind was. Master Ryokan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod in agreement or shake his head in disagreement. He simply listened with a complete and patient attention. His gaze was calm and steady, and it made Ishikawa feel, for the first time, a little self-conscious. It was like shouting into a deep, silent canyon. The force of his own words seemed to echo back at him, sounding hollow and strangely frantic. When Ishikawa finally paused to take a breath, Ryokan smiled gently. "Your mind is very active," he said simply. "Let us have some tea." The master turned his attention to the tea ceremony. His every movement was deliberate, economical, and filled with a profound sense of presence. He rinsed the small, earthenware cups with hot water. He spooned the powdered green tea into the bowl with a delicate bamboo scoop. He poured the water from the iron kettle, and the soft hissing sound was the only reply to Ishikawa's long speech. He whisked the tea with a bamboo whisk, his wrist moving in a quick, fluid motion until a perfect, jade-colored foam formed on the surface. Throughout this process, Ishikawa's mind was still working. He analyzed the master's movements, comparing them to the classical descriptions of the tea ceremony. He noted the rustic, imperfect quality of the tea bowl and began to formulate a theory about the Zen aesthetic of wabi-sabi. He was still observing, still cataloging, still trying to fit the experience into the framework of his existing knowledge. Ryokan picked up the tea bowl, but instead of handing it to his guest, he picked up one of the small empty cups and placed it in front of the professor. Then, he took the teapot, a simple vessel of dark clay, and began to pour. The cup was a beautiful, simple piece, likely made by a local potter. A dark, fragrant tea began to fill it. Ishikawa watched, his mind already preparing the next series of questions he wanted to ask. He was so absorbed in his own thoughts that he barely noticed as the tea reached the brim of the cup. But Ryokan did not stop pouring. The hot, brown liquid continued to flow, spilling over the lip of the cup. It ran down the sides, forming a small, steaming pool in the saucer. Ishikawa watched, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. The master kept pouring. The saucer, too, began to overflow. A stream of tea trickled onto the dark, polished wood of the serving tray, staining its surface. Still, the master's hand was steady, his expression serene, as he continued to pour tea into the already full cup. Finally, as the tea began to drip from the tray onto the clean tatami mat, Ishikawa could contain himself no longer. "Stop!" he cried out, his voice sharp with alarm and impatience. "What are you doing? The cup is full. It's overflowing. No more will go in." Master Ryokan stopped pouring. He placed the teapot down gently. He looked at the overflowing cup, the spreading stain on the mat, and then he looked directly into Professor Ishikawa's eyes. His gaze was not scolding, but it was clear and penetrating, like a mirror. "Like this cup," the master said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "You are full. You are full of your own opinions, your own ideas, your own speculations. You come to me asking for a teaching, but your mind has no room to receive it. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" The words hung in the silent air. The only sound was the soft drip, drip, drip of the tea from the tray onto the mat. For a long, stunned moment, Ishikawa could not speak. A wave of heat washed over his face, a mixture of shame and anger. His first instinct was to defend himself, to argue, to prove the master wrong. His ego, the proud scholar, felt insulted. But then he looked at the mess on the mat. He saw the wasted tea, the beautiful cup unable to hold what was being offered because it was already full. And in that overflowing cup, for the first time in his life, he saw a perfect reflection of himself. He saw his own mind, so crammed with words, theories, and arguments that it was constantly spilling over, unable to receive a single, simple drop of direct experience. He had come here to acquire more knowledge, to pour more into his already full cup, and the master had shown him the utter futility of it. The tension that had held his body rigid for years suddenly seemed to snap. The fortress of his intellect, which he had spent a lifetime building, crumbled in an instant. A profound sense of his own foolishness washed over him, but it was not a painful feeling. It was a release. It was the feeling of a heavy burden being lifted from his shoulders. All his books, all his arguments, all his pride, they had not brought him peace. They had been the very walls of his prison. Tears welled in his eyes, tears of a kind he had never known. They were not tears of sadness, but of a deep and humbling relief. He slowly lowered his head, his forehead touching the tatami mat in a deep, genuine bow. It was not the formal bow of a scholar to a master. It was the bow of a thirsty man who had finally been shown the way to the well. He stayed in that position for a long time. When he finally looked up, Master Ryokan was smiling, the same simple, gentle smile as before. The master took a clean, dry cloth and began to wipe up the spilled tea. He then took a fresh, empty cup and placed it before Ishikawa. Without a word, he poured another cup of tea, this time stopping just before the brim. Ishikawa picked up the cup. His hands, which had so often gestured with intellectual authority, were now steady with a newfound humility. He raised the cup to his lips, and for the first time, he did not think about the tea. He did not consider its origin, its quality, or its symbolic meaning. He simply tasted it. He felt its warmth, its subtle bitterness, its clean, earthy fragrance. It was the most delicious tea he had ever had. He had finally emptied his cup, and in that emptiness, he had found room to receive the world. Ishikawa did not return to the capital the next day or the day after. He stayed at the small temple, not as a visiting professor, but as a quiet observer. He put away his fine robes and his books. Ryokan gave him a simple set of work clothes and a room no larger than the one he had been given. His first task, assigned by the master with that same gentle smile, was to scrub the stain from the tatami mat in the tea room. As he worked, his scholar's hands, unused to such labor, his mind, out of habit, began its old tricks. It analyzed the chemical properties of the tea stain. It recalled historical methods for cleaning tatami. It critiqued his own inefficient scrubbing technique. It was a familiar, restless hum, but now he had a new reference point. He would see the thoughts arising, and he would picture the overflowing teacup. He would see that his mind was trying to fill itself again, and he would gently let the thoughts go. He would return his attention to the simple, physical sensations of the task, the rough texture of the brush, the smell of the damp straw, the ache in his shoulders. His days fell into a simple rhythm, dictated not by intellectual pursuits, but by the needs of the temple. He would wake before dawn, enjoying Ryokan in a period of silent sitting. At first, this was agony. His mind was a marketplace of shouting ideas, but he did not fight them. He simply watched them, as he had watched the river of thoughts from the hermit's bank, a story Ryokan had shared with him in a rare moment of speech. He let the thoughts come and go without serving them tea. Slowly, incrementally, the spaces between the thoughts began to widen. He began to experience moments of pure, simple being, where he was not Professor Ishikawa, the great scholar, but just a man sitting in a quiet room, breathing. He swept the leaves in the courtyard with the master's own bamboo broom. He learned that there was a way to sweep that was not a battle against the leaves, but a dance with the wind. He chopped wood for the kitchen fire and discovered a profound satisfaction in the clean split of a log, a satisfaction that no amount of philosophical understanding could provide. He washed rice in the cold mountain stream, feeling the individual grains slip through his fingers, and it felt more real and true than any abstract concept he had ever studied. He was emptying his cup day by day, moment by moment. Each simple, mindful action was a way of pouring out the stale water of his old knowledge to make room for the fresh, clear water of direct experience. He spoke very little, and Ryokan spoke even less. The teachings were not in words, but in the shared silence, in the way the master would pause to notice the pattern of moss on a stone, or the way he would mend a torn paper screen with such loving attention. One afternoon, months after his arrival, a group of scholars from the capital, worried by Ishikawa's long absence, made the journey to the temple. They found him in the vegetable garden, his hands covered in rich, dark earth, carefully tending a row of radishes. They were shocked. This was the revered professor, a man of letters and high culture, now engaged in the work of a common farmer. They began to question him, to debate with him, trying to draw him back into their world of ideas. They spoke of new political appointments, of recent poetry contests, of a complex dispute over a passage in an ancient text. Ishikawa listened patiently. He heard their words, but they sounded distant, like the buzzing of insects. He saw their minds, so full, so overflowing with opinions and arguments, and he felt a deep compassion for them. He saw himself just a few months prior. Finally, one of the scholars, with a tone of pity, asked him, "Professor, what have you learned here, in this rustic place? away from all the great books and the great minds. Ishikawa looked at his hands, at the soil under his fingernails. He looked at the small green radish shoots pushing their way toward the sun. He looked up at the clear blue sky. A simple, genuine smile spread across his face. He did not quote a sutra. He did not formulate a philosophical argument. He simply said, "I have learned that when I am hungry, I eat, and when I am tired, I sleep." The scholars stared at him, bewildered. This was the wisdom he had gained? A simple-minded tautology that any child could utter. They looked at each other, convinced that the old professor had lost his brilliant mind in this desolate place. They soon made their excuses and left, shaking their heads in disappointment. After they were gone, Ryokan, who had been watching from the temple veranda, came down to the garden. He stood beside Ishikawa for a moment, looking at the neat rows of vegetables. "Your cup is becoming empty," Ryokan said. Ishikawa bowed his head, not in deference, but in simple, heartfelt gratitude. "Thank you for the tea, master," he said. He knew then that he would never return to his fortress of books. He had discovered that the greatest library was the world itself, and the only way to read it was with a quiet mind and an empty cup. Part 6. The Wisdom of the Willow Tree. In a province known for its harsh, unpredictable weather, where typhoons would sweep in from the sea with sudden and devastating force, there stood a very old monastery. It was perched on a hill, overlooking a wide, windswept valley. In the monastery's main courtyard grew two remarkable trees. One was a great and ancient oak, a patriarch among trees. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, its bark like a suit of armor, and its branches were massive, unyielding limbs that reached for the sky with an air of defiant strength. It was a symbol of power, of endurance, of immovable resolve. Generations of monks had looked to the oak as an example of fortitude and unwavering spirit. Beside it, near a small, quiet pond, grew a willow. It was just as old, but it possessed an entirely different character. Its trunk was slender and supple, and its long, graceful branches
wept toward the earth, swaying with even the slightest breeze. It seemed a creature of softness, of yielding, of gentle acceptance. Compared to the mighty oak, it looked fragile, almost vulnerable. A young monk named Tenzin lived in this monastery. He was strong and disciplined, and he admired the oak tree with all his heart. He modeled his life and his spiritual practice upon it. In the meditation hall, he would hold his body with a rigid, unbending stillness, his muscles tense with effort. He saw this physical rigidity as a sign of his mental strength and control. When difficult thoughts or painful emotions arose during his meditation, he would meet them with the same unyielding force. He would build a wall of resistance, a mental fortress, determined not to be moved by the inner storms of his mind. He treated his body like a stubborn adversary that needed to be conquered. He would push himself to the limits of endurance, fasting for long periods, sitting for hours in painful postures, believing that by breaking the body's will, he could liberate his spirit. His shoulders were often tight with tension, a permanent knot of effort between his shoulder blades. His jaw was set in a line of constant determination. He was, in his own mind, becoming as strong and immovable as the great oak. The abbot of the monastery, an old master named Hiroshi, watched Tenzin with a gentle, concerned eye. He saw the young monk's sincerity and his immense effort, but he also saw the deep strain it was causing him. He saw that Tenzin's strength was brittle, like a rope pulled too taut, and that his quest for stillness was, paradoxically, creating a state of constant, exhausting tension. Peace, Hiroshi knew, could not be won through battle. One autumn, the sky began to darken with an ominous, bruised purple. The wind, which usually whispered through the valley, began to howl, a low, mournful sound that rattled the paper screens of the monastery. The birds fell silent, and an eerie, heavy stillness settled over the land. The monks knew the signs. A great typhoon was coming. They hurried to secure the temple, lashing down roof tiles and bringing everything movable indoors. Tenzin worked with a grim, determined energy, his movements as rigid and forceful as ever. As night fell, the storm hit. It was a tempest of unimaginable fury. The wind shrieked like a vengeful spirit, tearing at the ancient wooden buildings. Rain came down not in drops, but in solid, horizontal sheets that felt like 1,000 thrown stones. The monks gathered in the main hall, chanting the sutras, their voices a low hum against the violent symphony of the storm. Tenzin sat in the center of the hall, his back ramrod straight, his body a bastion of resistance against the chaos outside. He felt the building tremble. He heard the terrifying crash of a tree falling somewhere in the nearby forest, but he would not yield. He held his body tight, a small, human oak, determined to withstand the storm through sheer force of will. He believed this was the ultimate test of his practice. The storm raged all night. By dawn, it had passed. A strange, washed-out light filled the sky. The wind was gone, and an almost unnatural quiet had fallen. The monks emerged from the hall to survey the damage. The valley was a scene of devastation. Trees were uprooted, fields were flooded, and the monastery itself had suffered. Roof tiles were scattered, and a section of the outer wall had collapsed. But the most shocking sight was in the central courtyard. The great oak, the symbol of unyielding strength, was broken. A massive gust of wind, too powerful for even its mighty trunk to resist, had caught its rigid branches and snapped it in two. The top half of the magnificent tree lay on the ground, a tangle of splintered wood and torn leaves, its life force spent. It had met the storm with inflexible power, and it had been destroyed. The monk stood in stunned silence, looking at the fallen giant. It felt like a terrible omen. Tenzin stared at the broken oak, his heart filled with a cold, hollow feeling. The ideal upon which he had built his entire practice lay shattered before him. His philosophy of strength, of resistance, had been proven a failure. If the great oak could not withstand the storm, what hope was there for him? He felt a sense of despair, a deep crack in the foundation of his own spirit. Then, Master Hiroshi, who was standing beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder and pointed. "Look," he said softly. Tenzin turned his gaze, and he saw the willow. The willow tree was not only standing, it was almost entirely unharmed. A few of its smaller twigs were broken, and its leaves were tattered, but its main branches and its slender trunk were intact. It had survived the same ferocious storm that had destroyed the mighty oak. Tenzin looked at the willow, and then back at the broken oak, and he did not understand. "How can this be?" he whispered. "The willow is so much weaker than the oak. How did it survive?" "Come," Hiroshi said, and he led Tenzin over to the willow tree. He took one of the long, slender branches in his hand and bent it easily. It yielded without resistance, curving into a graceful arc. When he let it go, it sprang back to its original position, unharmed. The oak met the storm with resistance, the master explained. It pitted its strength against the strength of the wind. When the wind pushed, the oak pushed back. It held its ground, rigid and proud, and for a long time its strength was enough. But the storm was stronger, and because the oak would not bend, it broke. He then gestured to the willow. "The willow has a different kind of wisdom," he said. "It does not resist the wind.
It cooperates with it. When the wind blows, the willow does not stand firm and fight. It bows. It yields. It lets the force of the wind pass through it. Its branches dance with the storm. And because it bends,
Because it is flexible and soft, it is not broken. Its softness is its true strength. Hiroshi turned to look directly at Tenzin, his eyes full of a deep, compassionate understanding. You have tried to be the oak, Tenzin. You have held your body and your mind with a rigid strength. You have met your inner storms with resistance. You believe that to yield is to be weak. But true strength, the strength that endures, is not in rigidity. It is in flexibility. It is in the ability to yield without breaking. The master's words landed in Tenzin's heart with the force of a revelation. He thought of his meditation practice, of the immense, exhausting effort he expended to hold his body still, to fight his thoughts. He suddenly saw that this tension was not a sign of strength, but a form of fear. He was afraid of his own thoughts, his own feelings, his own body. He was trying to control them, to dominate them, just as the oak had tried to dominate the wind. He looked at his own hands, and for the first time, he noticed that his knuckles were white, his fists subtly clenched. He consciously willed them to relax, and a small wave of relief spread up his arms. He brought his awareness to his jaw and felt the tight clenching of his muscles. He let it go. He felt the knot of tension between his shoulder blades, the knot he had carried for years as a badge of honor, and he invited it to soften. "Go to the meditation hall," Hiroshi said gently, "but this time, do not go to fight. Go and be the willow." Tenzin walked to the hall, his body feeling strangely light and new. He took his usual cushion, but instead of forcing his body into a rigid, painful posture, he allowed it to settle. He found a position that was upright, but not stiff, balanced, but not tense. He did not brace himself for the coming onslaught of thoughts. Instead, he simply began to breathe, following the gentle, natural rhythm of his body. A familiar anxious thought arose, a worry about his lack of progress on the path. The old Tenzin, the oak, would have immediately pushed it away, building a wall against it. But the new Tenzin, the willow, did something different. He did not resist the thought. He did not fight it. He simply allowed it to be there. He bowed to it mentally. He let the energy of the thought, the wind of his anxiety, pass through his awareness without opposition. He did not get caught up in its story. He just let it blow. And a remarkable thing happened. Without the fuel of his resistance, the thought lost its power. It was just a passing breeze. It arose, and then it subsided, leaving the sky of his mind clear. Then a physical pain arose in his knee, a familiar companion from his long hours of rigid sitting. The oak's response would have been to ignore it, to grit his teeth and endure it, to treat the pain as an enemy to be conquered. The willow's response was to soften around it. He did not try to make the pain go away. He brought his awareness
to the sensation, not with resistance, but with a gentle curiosity. He breathed into the area of tension. He imagined the muscles and ligaments around his knee becoming soft, pliable, like the branches of the willow. He yielded to the sensation, and as he softened around the pain, its sharp, demanding quality began to change. It was still there, but it no longer had a tight, hot center. It became a diffuse, manageable warmth. By yielding to it, he had taken away its power to dominate his attention. Tenzin sat for a long time, not in a state of forced stillness, but in a state of dynamic, flowing peace. His body was relaxed, yet alert. His mind was open, allowing thoughts and sensations to arise and pass away
like clouds in the sky. He was no longer a fortress, but an open field. He was no longer an oak, but a willow, dancing with the ever-changing winds of the present moment. He finally understood. True peace was not the absence of storms. Storms would always come, both outside and inside. True peace was the wisdom to bow, to yield, to remain soft and flexible in the face of life's irresistible forces. The ultimate strength was not in the power to stand unmovable, but in the grace to bend without breaking. As he rose from his cushion, his movements were fluid and easy. He walked out into the courtyard and stood before the willow tree, its branches swaying gently in the clean, post-storm air. He bowed to it, a deep bow of gratitude to his greatest teacher. He had learned that the path to enlightenment was not a rigid, upward climb, but a soft, downward release into the supple, yielding, and unbreakable wisdom of the willow. Tenzin's transformation was not a sudden, dramatic event, but a gradual, gentle unfolding, like a tightly clenched fist slowly opening to a relaxed palm. The wisdom of the willow began to inform every aspect of his life. He started to see the principle of yielding not as a passive surrender, but as an active, intelligent form of engagement with the world. When working in the monastery's kitchen, he used to chop vegetables with a fierce, percussive rhythm, his knife striking the wooden block with rigid force. Now, he learned to let the weight of the knife do the work. He held the handle with a light, relaxed grip, and his cuts became fluid, precise, and almost silent. He was no longer imposing his will upon the carrot. He was cooperating with the nature of the blade and the vegetable, finding the path of least resistance. The act of preparing a meal became a lesson in effortless action. He had always struggled in his relationship with a particular senior monk, a man named Kenjiro, who was stern and often critical of Tenzin's work. The old Tenzin, the oak, would meet Kenjiro's criticisms with a defensive, rigid pride. He would argue his point, stand his ground, and then spend the rest of the day replaying the conversation in his mind, his thoughts a tangled mess of resentment and self-justification. This inner conflict was exhausting, a constant, low-grade storm. Remembering the willow, Tenzin tried a new approach. The next time Kenjiro pointed out a flaw in the way Tenzin had swept the veranda, Tenzin did not resist. He did not immediately defend himself. Instead, he bowed. He listened to the words without building a wall against them. He let the criticism wash over him, like a gust of wind. He did not have to agree with it, but he did not have to fight it either. He simply received it. "Thank you for your instruction," he said, his voice calm and even. "I will try to be more mindful." Kenjiro was taken aback. He had been expecting an argument, a confrontation. Faced with Tenzin's soft, yielding response, the force of his own criticism had nowhere to land. It simply dissipated. A look of surprise and then a grudging respect appeared in the older monk's eyes. From that day on, the tension between them began to dissolve. By refusing to be a rigid wall for Kenjiro to push against, Tenzin had transformed a relationship of conflict into one of potential harmony. He learned that yielding could be a powerful tool for peace, not just within himself, but between people. The most profound changes, however, continued to happen on his meditation cushion. He began to explore the landscape of his own body with the spirit of the willow. He discovered that his body was a repository of old stories, of forgotten tensions. There were knots of grief in his chest, bands of fear around his stomach, and layers of anger in his jaw. The oak had tried to ignore these sensations or crush them with willpower. The willow taught him to meet them with softness and breath.
When he felt a familiar tightness in his chest, he would not try to force it open. He would simply bring his awareness to it, and as he breathed out, he would imagine that area of his body softening, melting, becoming more spacious. He was not trying to get rid of the feeling. He was making room for it. He was yielding to its presence. And in this gentle, allowing space, the old, frozen emotions began to thaw and release, not in a dramatic flood, but in a slow, quiet trickle. He was learning to heal himself, not by fighting his pain, but by becoming soft enough to let it move through him. Master Hiroshi observed Tenzin's evolution with quiet satisfaction. He saw the harsh lines of effort on the young monk's face soften into an expression of calm attentiveness. He saw the rigidity in his posture replaced by a balanced, graceful ease. Tenzin's strength was no longer brittle. It was resilient, alive, and deeply rooted. One day, Hiroshi called Tenzin to the courtyard where the fallen oak was being cut into firewood. The raw, splintered heartwood was exposed to the air. The oak was strong, Hiroshi said, placing a hand on the rough wood. Its strength was in its resistance, but that is the strength of a single lifetime. It is a strength that is ultimately broken by a greater force.
Then he led Tenzin to the pond by the willow. The water was still, and the reflection of the weeping branches was perfect on its surface. The willow is also strong, Hiroshi continued. Its strength is in its ability to yield. This is the strength of life itself. It is the strength of water, which is soft enough to yield to any container, yet powerful enough to wear away the hardest stone. It is the strength of the breath, which enters and leaves the body without force, yet sustains our very existence. Do not seek the strength that breaks. Cultivate the strength that bends, that yields, that endures. This is the path of true peace. Tenzin bowed to his master, his movement as fluid and natural as the willow branch swaying in the breeze. He had finally understood that the most profound power is found not in the clenched fist, but in the open hand, and that the greatest stability comes not from standing rigid against the winds of change, but from learning how to dance with them. Part 7. The Uncarved Block. In a village renowned for its master artisans, there lived a woodcarver named Kenji. He was not the most famous carver in the district, nor the most flamboyant. His workshop was not filled with dramatic sculptures of dragons or gods. Instead, Kenji was known for one thing: his ability to carve simple, perfect wooden bowls. These bowls were objects of profound and understated beauty. The grain of the wood flowed in uninterrupted lines. The curve was so natural it felt as if it had grown that way, and the surface was so smooth it felt like polished stone warmed by the sun. To hold one of Kenji's bowls was to feel a sense of wholeness, of simple, unadorned peace. Many younger carvers would come to watch him work, hoping to learn the secret of his skill. They would arrive with their heads full of complex techniques, intricate designs, and a burning ambition to make a name for themselves. They would watch Kenji, expecting to see a flurry of masterful cuts, a display of dazzling virtuosity, but they were always disappointed. Kenji's process was one of almost maddening slowness and simplicity. He would spend the first day, sometimes several days, doing nothing but sitting with the raw block of wood. He would place it on a stand in the center of his workshop, and he would simply look at it. He would walk around it, observing it from all angles, in the morning light and in the evening shadow. He would run his hands over its rough, bark-covered surface, feeling its density, its texture, its history. He was not planning his design. He was listening.
He was trying to hear the story the wood had to tell, to understand the form that already lived within it. The young apprentices, restless and eager to start carving, would grow impatient. "Master," one of them finally asked one day, "you have the finest tools and your skill is unmatched. Why do you waste so much time just looking at a plain
Block of wood." Kenji, who was at that moment gently tracing a line in the grain with his finger, looked up and smiled. "You think the work of a carver is to add something to the wood," he said, his voice as soft as the cedar shavings on his floor. "You want to impose your clever designs, your intricate patterns, your own ambition. But you are mistaken. The bowl is already here. It has been here since the tree was a seed. My work is not to add, but to take away. I am simply removing the parts of the wood that are not the bowl." This idea was a puzzle to the apprentices. They saw a rough, formless block. Kenji saw a finished bowl, hidden within. His work, he explained, was a process of revelation, not creation. The skill was not in the complexity of the cutting, but in the wisdom of knowing what to remove. And that wisdom came from listening, from understanding the wood's own nature, its grain, its knots, its inherent strengths and weaknesses. To force a shape upon the wood that went against its nature would be to create something weak, something false, something without life. But to follow the wood's own inclination, to gently and patiently remove the excess, was to reveal the perfection that was already present. This story of the master carver is a story about us. We come into this world like a simple, uncarved block of wood. In our earliest childhood, there is a wholeness, a simple, direct experience of life. A child does not have a complex identity, a long list of accomplishments and failures, or a mind cluttered with abstract theories. A child is simply present, experiencing the world with a raw and unfiltered immediacy. This is our original nature, our uncarved block. But as we grow, the world begins its carving. Our parents, our teachers, our society, they all come to us with their tools, their chisels and saws of expectation and belief. They begin to carve away at our original simplicity. They tell us who we should be, what we should value, how we should behave. They carve into us the name of a family, the identity of a nation, the beliefs of a culture. Then, we take up the tools ourselves. We begin to carve our own identity. We add layers of ambition. I must be successful. We add layers of self-judgment. I am not good enough. We carve in lines of regret from the past and grooves of anxiety about the future. We accumulate knowledge, opinions, and beliefs, and we mistake this complex, heavily carved surface for our true self. We become intricate, complicated sculptures, covered in the marks of a lifetime of doing, striving, and becoming. And in this process, we lose touch with the simple, beautiful grain of our own being. We forget the wholeness of the uncarved block. We become heavy with all the layers we have added, all the unnecessary parts we have mistaken for ourselves. Our lives become tense and effortful, because we are constantly trying to maintain this complex, artificial shape. We are like a piece of wood carved against its own grain, full of internal stress, liable to crack under pressure. The path of Zen, the path of letting the mind and body relax, is not a process of adding more. It is not about learning a new, clever technique or accumulating more spiritual knowledge to add to our collection. It is a process of uncarving. It is the gentle, patient work of removing what is unnecessary, of letting go of the layers we have accumulated in order to reveal the simple, peaceful, and whole nature that has been there all along. Think of the tension you hold in your shoulders. That is not a part of your original nature. It is a layer you have added, carved into your body by years of worry and striving. The practice of relaxation is not about forcing the shoulders to be loose. It is about simply letting go of the effort of holding them tight. It is removing the carving of tension to reveal the natural, relaxed state that lies beneath. You are not creating relaxation. You are revealing it. Think of the constant stream of judgments and opinions that flows through your mind. I like this. I don't like that. This is good. That is bad. This is not the original, simple awareness you were born with. This is a complex layer of carving, a set of habits that filters and distorts your experience of the world. The practice of meditation is the work of setting down the chisel of judgment. It is the practice of simply observing, of allowing experience to be what it is, without adding the unnecessary layer of your opinion. In doing so, you begin to remove the carving of reactivity, and you touch the smooth, unblemished surface of pure awareness. Consider your identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are. I am a parent, a worker, a success, a failure, an anxious person, a confident person. This story is a collection of carvings, a series of labels that you have mistaken for your true self. But you are not the story. You are the wood beneath the carvings. You are the silent, spacious awareness in which the story appears. The practice of letting go is the willingness to see that these labels are not you. They are temporary forms, patterns carved onto the surface. By not clinging to them, by not defining yourself by them, you begin to experience the freedom of your uncarved nature, which is vast, open, and undefined. Like the master carver Kenji, this work of uncarving requires patience and a deep listening. You cannot force it. You cannot hack away at your habits and conditioning with a violent chisel. This only creates more jagged edges, more tension. Instead, you must sit with yourself, as Kenji sat with the block of wood. You must learn to listen to your own being. You listen to your body. Where is the tension? Where is the holding? You don't judge it or try to force it to release. You simply bring a gentle, accepting awareness to it. You breathe into it. And in the light of this kind awareness, the unnecessary holding begins to soften and dissolve on its own. You are not breaking the tension. You are allowing it to be released. You are removing the part of the wood that is not the bowl. You listen to your mind. You watch the thoughts, the emotions, the stories as they arise and pass away. You see the habit of worry, the pattern of self-criticism, the urge to control. You do not condemn these patterns. You simply see them for what they are. Carvings, accumulated habits. They are not your essential nature. By seeing them clearly, without identifying with them, you begin to loosen their hold on you. You are gently sanding away the rough surfaces, revealing the smooth grain beneath. This is why simplicity is so highly valued in Zen. A simple life with fewer distractions and possessions gives you the space to do this inner work. It is difficult to hear the wisdom of the wood in a noisy, cluttered workshop. It is difficult to connect with your own uncarved nature when you are constantly adding more layers of complexity to your life. The practice of simplifying your outer world is a support for the process of simplifying your inner world. The uncarved block is a symbol of potential, of wholeness, of a state of being that is effortless and natural. It is called Pu in Taoism, a concept that deeply influenced Zen. It represents our original self, before it is shaped and conditioned by the world. Returning to this state does not mean becoming ignorant or naive. The master carver is not an unthinking piece of wood. He is a master, precisely because he understands the wood's nature so completely. In the same way, returning to our uncarved nature means becoming more truly and authentically ourselves. It means living in harmony with our own being, just as the finished bowl is in perfect harmony with the grain of the wood from which it came. So, as you rest, as you prepare for sleep, consider this image of the uncarved block. See your own life, your own identity, your own body and mind as a piece of wood. Notice the carvings, the layers that have been added. Notice the tension, the worry, the complexity. But know that beneath all of that, your original nature remains, perfectly whole and untouched. It is like the deep, silent heartwood of a great tree. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to add anything to yourself to find peace. The peace you seek is already here, hidden within you, just as the bowl is hidden within the block of wood. Your work is simply to let go, to gently remove what is unnecessary. Let go of the tension in your body. Let go of the story of who you think you are. Let go of the need to strive and to become. With each breath out, imagine you are gently brushing away a layer of dust, a small wood shaving of effort. You are not forcing anything. You are simply allowing the unnecessary to fall away. And in this gentle, patient process of uncarving, you will come to rest in the simple, profound, and peaceful beauty
of your own true nature. The perfect bowl is already here. You just need to allow it to be revealed. This process of uncarving is not a one-time event, but a continuous practice, a way of living. Kenji, the master carver, did not just apply his philosophy in the workshop. It permeated his entire existence. His home was simple, containing only what was necessary and beautiful. His meals were frugal, eaten with a slow, mindful appreciation. His speech was spare and deliberate, each word chosen with care, with nothing extraneous added. He lived as he carved, by gently removing the non-essential to reveal the inherent truth and beauty of the moment. An apprentice, eager to understand this more deeply, once asked Kenji, "Master, when you are finished with a bowl, it is a static, complete object, but our lives are always changing. How can we return to the uncarved block when the world is constantly trying to carve us anew each day?" Kenji was sharpening one of his chisels on a whetstone, a rhythmic, soothing sound of steel on wet stone. He did not stop his work as he replied. "You see the bowl as a finished thing," he said, "but I see it as a moment of perfect balance. The tree it came from was always changing, growing, responding to the sun and the rain. The bowl too will change. Its color will deepen with age. It will be warmed by hands and filled with food. It may even crack and be mended. Its nature is not static. Its perfection lies in its ongoing harmony with its own nature." He paused and held the newly sharpened chisel up to the light, inspecting its razor-thin edge. "You are right," he continued. "The world will never stop trying to carve you. Every day you will encounter people and events that want to impose a shape upon you. They will offer you the chisel of anger, the saw of greed, the rasp of fear. The temptation is to pick up these tools and start carving yourself, or to let others carve you in order to fit in, to be safe, to be admired. The practice is not to build a wall around your uncarved block to protect it. That would only make you rigid and brittle, like the oak tree in the storm. The practice is to become so deeply familiar with your own true nature, with the grain of your own wood, that you can instantly recognize a cut that goes against it. When someone offers you the chisel of anger, you feel its alien sharpness, its disharmony with your own peaceful core. And because you know your own nature, you have the wisdom to simply set the tool down. You do not have to use it. This then is the deeper practice. It is not about retreating from the world to an imaginary pristine state. It is about engaging with the world from a place of deep inner knowing. It is the difference between a piece of dead wood on a workbench and a living, growing tree. A tree is constantly interacting with its environment, the wind, the sun, the soil. It is shaped by these forces, yet it never ceases to be a tree. It grows according to its own innate pattern, its own treeness. It does not try to become a rock or a river. To live as the uncarved block is to live with this kind of organic, authentic integrity. It means that in any situation, you act not from a set of rigid, pre-carved rules or identities, but from a deep, intuitive sense of what is true and harmonious for you. When you are rested in your own uncarved nature, your actions become simple, direct, and appropriate to the moment. They are effortless because they flow with the grain of your being, not against it. Consider a moment of decision. The carved mind will approach it with a complex calculus of pros and cons, of past experiences and future anxieties. What if I make the wrong choice? What will people think? What is the most advantageous outcome? The mind becomes a noisy workshop, filled with the clatter of conflicting tools. But the mind that is in touch with its uncarved nature approaches the decision differently. It becomes quiet. It listens. It feels its way into the situation, sensing which path is in harmony with its deepest being. The choice that arises from this stillness is often simple, clear, and feels self-evidently right, even if it cannot be logically explained. This is not an abdication of responsibility. It is the assumption of a deeper responsibility, the responsibility to be true to oneself. The master carver is not careless. His deep listening makes him exquisitely careful. In the same way, a person living from their uncarved nature is not thoughtless. They are profoundly thoughtful, because their actions are rooted in a deep awareness of themselves and the world. As you lie here, letting go of the day, you can practice this deep listening. Feel the landscape of your own body. Do not try to change it, just feel the grain of it. Feel the places that are dense and knotted, and the places that are smooth and flowing. Do not judge them. This is your wood. This is your nature in this moment. By simply bringing a kind, accepting awareness to it, you are beginning the process of uncarving. You are allowing the wood to be what it is. And in this acceptance, a natural softening occurs. The unnecessary tension, the carvings of the day's stress and worry begin to lose their sharpness. They are not your true nature. They are just marks on the surface. Your true nature is the silent, living wood beneath. It is whole, it is peaceful, and it is always already here. You do not need to achieve it. You only need to return to it. Let go of the tools, let go of the design, and rest in the simple, profound perfection of the uncarved block. The Part 8, The Moon in the Water. There is an old Zen story, a tale as simple and profound as a drop of dew on a lotus leaf. It speaks of a troop of monkeys who lived in a forest high in the mountains. One night, the sky was perfectly clear, without a single cloud, and a full moon, as bright and round as a polished silver plate, hung in the dark expanse. The monkeys were playing in the high branches of a great tree that overhung a deep, still pond. The leader of the monkeys, a large and particularly ambitious creature, happened to look down. There, in the dark mirror-like surface of the water, he saw it, the moon. It was a perfect, shimmering circle of light, floating serenely in the depths of the pond. A great and terrible thought seized him. The moon, the most beautiful treasure of the night sky, had fallen into the water. What a catastrophe! But also, what an opportunity. If he and his troop could rescue the moon from the pond, what heroes they would be. They could possess this beautiful, shining thing for themselves. Filled with a frantic sense of purpose, he chattered and shrieked, gathering his troop. "Look," he cried, pointing a long, hairy finger at the water. "The moon has fallen into the pond. We must get it out." The other monkeys, looking down and seeing the beautiful, wavering disk of light, were filled with the same mixture of alarm and desire. They had to have it. A flurry of excitement and anxiety swept through the branches. The leader, being a monkey of action, quickly devised a plan. "We will form a chain," he declared. "I will hold on to the highest branch, and the next monkey will hold on to my tail, and the next will hold on to his, and so on, until the last monkey can reach down and scoop the moon out of the water." It seemed like a brilliant plan. The monkeys chattered in enthusiastic agreement. And so they began. The leader gripped a sturdy branch with his hands and feet. The next monkey clambered down and took a firm hold of his tail. A third monkey grabbed the second one's tail, and a fourth grabbed the third's. The chain grew longer and longer, a living, swaying ladder of monkeys, stretching down from the high branch, getting ever closer to the prize. The monkey at the very bottom of the chain, the smallest of the troop, reached down with his trembling hands. His fingers touched the surface of the water, and the beautiful, shimmering moon shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments of light. He cried out in dismay. The other monkeys, feeling the tremor of his panic travel up the chain, looked down and saw the broken moon. They thought they had destroyed it. But as the water grew still again, the fragments slowly coalesced, and the moon became whole once more, shimmering and enticing as ever. The small monkey at the bottom tried again. He reached into the water, his hands cupped, trying to scoop up the light, but it was like trying to catch a sunbeam. The water and the light simply slipped through his fingers, and the moment his hands disturbed the surface, the moon would break apart again. He could feel nothing solid, nothing he could grasp. Frustrated and desperate, the monkeys on the chain began to pull and sway with greater force, urging the last monkey to try harder.
The leader at the top strained to hold on to the branch, his knuckles white. The entire chain was a tense, vibrating line of striving and desire, all focused on this one impossible task of grasping the ungraspable. And then, just at the moment of their greatest, most frantic effort, the branch broke. With a great crack and a collective shriek of terror, the entire chain of monkeys plunged into the cold water of the pond. Sputtering and confused, they splashed their way to the shore. They sat there, shivering and miserable, their grand plan a total failure, the beautiful moon still floating serenely in the water, just out of reach, mocking them. They were defeated, wet and exhausted.
At that moment, an old wise monkey, who had been sitting quietly on a higher branch, watching the whole spectacle with a calm, knowing eye, finally spoke. He had not joined the frantic chain. He had not been caught up in the excitement. He simply raised a long, wrinkled finger and pointed not down, but up. "Friends," he said, his voice quiet and clear, "you are looking in the wrong place." The wet, miserable monkeys followed his gesture. They lifted their heads from the pond and looked up at the night sky. And there it was, the real moon. It was hanging in the vast, silent darkness, perfect, serene, and untouchable. It had never been in the water. It had never been in danger. It had never been theirs to rescue or to possess. What they had been chasing, what they had been striving so desperately to grasp, was only a reflection. This simple story is a profound metaphor for the human condition, for the way we so often seek peace and happiness. The pond is our own mind. The reflection of the moon in the water is the idea of happiness that we chase. We believe that peace is an object, a state, an experience that we can acquire and possess if we just try hard enough. Like the monkeys, we form a chain. We think, if I can just get that promotion, then I will be happy. So we grab onto the branch of ambition. But once we get the promotion, we find the happiness is fleeting. So we think, now, if I can just get a bigger house. And we grab onto the tail of the next monkey. If I can just find the perfect partner. If I can just get my children to behave. If I can just solve this one problem. If I can just achieve a perfectly silent mind in meditation. We build a long, precarious chain of if-onlys, each one dependent on the next, stretching ourselves further and further down, reaching for a shimmering reflection in the water of our own minds. We try to grasp it. We achieve a goal, and for a moment we feel a sense of satisfaction. We touch the reflection. But the moment we try to hold on to it, it shatters. The happiness dissolves into 1,000 glittering pieces of the next desire, the next worry. The very act of grasping disturbs the surface of the mind, and the peace we seek is broken. So we try again, with more effort, more striving, more tension. We pull harder on the chain, convinced that the problem is in our technique, that we just need to be more clever, more disciplined, more forceful. And then, inevitably, the branch breaks. We fall. We experience loss, disappointment, burnout, despair. Our grand plan to capture happiness fails. We are left sitting on the shore, wet and miserable, feeling that the peace we long for is an illusion, a cruel trick. This is the point of anxiety and exhaustion that so many of us reach. We have been striving so hard for so long to grasp a reflection. We have been looking for peace in the ceaseless, wavering activity of our own minds and in the ever-changing circumstances of the external world. And at this point, the wisdom of Zen, like the old wise monkey, simply points in a different direction. It points up. It invites us to lift our gaze from the reflection and to look for the real moon. The real moon is the peace that is already here. It is not something to be acquired, achieved, or grasped. It is the vast, silent, and unchanging awareness in which our entire lives unfold. It is our own true nature. It has never been lost. It has never been in danger. It is not dependent on the conditions of our lives, just as the real moon is not affected by the ripples in the pond. The problem is not that we lack peace. The problem is that we are looking for it in the wrong place. We are looking for it in the contents of our awareness, in our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences, the reflections on the water, instead of recognizing it as the awareness itself, the vast, silent sky that holds everything. When you feel anxious, that anxiety is a ripple on the pond. The monkey mind wants to do something about it. It wants to reach in and smooth the water, to grasp a feeling of calm. But the very act of reaching, of resisting the anxiety, creates more ripples. The wisdom is to stop looking at the ripple, to stop trying to fix it, and to look up. To remember that you are not the anxiety. You are the vast, silent awareness in which the anxiety is appearing. The sky is not disturbed by the storm clouds that pass through it. The real moon is not broken by the waves in the pond. When you are striving for a goal, believing your happiness depends on it, that is the frantic reaching for the reflection. The wisdom is not necessarily to abandon the goal, but to recognize that your fundamental peace and well-being do not depend on its attainment. You can act in the world, you can engage with life, but you do it with the deep, quiet understanding that the real moon is always in the sky. Your essential nature is already whole and complete. You are not a hungry ghost, desperately trying to grasp a reflection to fill an inner emptiness. You are the sky itself, vast and full. This understanding is the foundation of true relaxation. True relaxation is not a state you achieve. It is not the result of a perfectly smooth pond. A perfectly smooth pond
Is a rare and temporary condition.
True relaxation is the release of the effort of grasping. It is letting the monkey chain fall apart. It is the willingness to sit on the shore, to let the water be as it is, sometimes calm, sometimes choppy, and to rest your attention on the real, unchanging moon. As you lie here, preparing for sleep, you can feel this directly. Notice the thoughts and feelings that are present. They are the reflections in the pond. There might be worries about tomorrow, replays of today, pleasant memories, physical sensations. See if you can notice the tendency of the monkey mind to want to grab onto them, to either push the unpleasant ones away or cling to the pleasant ones. This is the beginning of the chain. Now, see if you can do as the old wise monkey did. Gently, without force, lift your gaze. Shift your attention from the contents of your mind to the awareness that is holding them. Feel the vast, silent space in which all these thoughts and feelings are appearing. This space is your true nature. It is naturally peaceful. It is silent. It is always here. It is the sky. It is the real moon. You don't have to create this space. You don't have to achieve it. You only have to recognize it. It is what is looking out of your eyes and hearing these words right now. Rest in this awareness. Let the reflections in the pond be as they are. They will shimmer. They will break apart. They will reform. It doesn't matter. They are not the source of your peace. The real moon is untouched. Your own deep, abiding nature is untouched by the fleeting dramas of your mind. By resting in this understanding, the frantic striving of the monkeys begins to cease. The body can relax because it no longer has to hold the tension of the chain. The mind can grow quiet because it is no longer fixated on the impossible task of grasping a reflection. This is the path to a peace that is not dependent on conditions. It is the peace of coming home to who you already are. You are not the monkey in the chain. You are the silent, watchful sky. This shift in perspective, from the reflection to the source, is not just a philosophical idea. It is a tangible, felt experience. It is the difference between being caught in a dream and waking up. In the dream, the events feel intensely real and important,
We run from monsters, we chase after treasures, and our heart pounds with the effort. When we wake up, we realize it was all just a play of consciousness. The fear and desire were real experiences, but their cause was illusory. Waking up to the real moon is a similar kind of shift. The dramas of our daily life, the strivings and anxieties, are the dream. The vast, silent awareness that is witnessing the dream is the waking state. To cultivate this shift, we can practice a form of gentle inquiry. When a strong emotion arises, like a wave of sadness or a surge of anger, the monkey mind immediately identifies with it. I am sad. I am angry.
This identification is what pulls us into the water. The gentle inquiry is to ask, from a place of simple curiosity, who is aware of this sadness? What is it that is witnessing this anger? This question acts like the wise monkey's pointing finger. It subtly shifts the focus from the emotion itself, the reflection, to the awareness of the emotion, the sky. You begin to notice that there is the feeling of sadness, and then there is the knowing of the feeling of sadness. And that knowing, that awareness, is not itself sad. It is calm, clear, and spacious. The sadness is a cloud, but you are the sky. By resting as the sky, you can allow the cloud to be there, to rain if it needs to, and to eventually pass, without being completely consumed by it. You are no longer drowning in the reflection. You are observing it from the safety of the shore. This practice can be applied to physical pain as well. When you feel a pain in your body, the immediate reaction is to contract around it, to resist it. I have a headache. This is bad. I want it to go away. This resistance is the frantic grasping of the monkeys. It adds a layer of mental suffering on top of the physical sensation. The inquiry is to soften around the sensation and ask, what is aware of this pain? You separate the raw physical sensation from the story your mind tells about it. You discover that there is the sensation, and then there is the awareness of the sensation. That awareness is not in pain. It is a neutral, open space that is simply holding the experience of pain. By resting in this awareness, the resistance dissolves, and often the intensity of the suffering diminishes, even if the physical sensation remains. You are no longer trying to scoop the painful reflection out of the water. You are resting in the vast sky that is untouched by it. This does not mean we become passive or indifferent to life. The wise monkey was not indifferent. He was simply clear-sighted. Knowing that the real moon is in the sky does not prevent you from enjoying its beautiful reflection in the water. In fact, it allows you to enjoy it more. When you are not desperately trying to possess the reflection, you are free to appreciate its shimmering, transient beauty. In the same way, when you know that your fundamental well-being is not dependent on external circumstances, you are free to engage with life more fully, with less fear and desperation. You can love someone without the anxious need for them to make you whole, because you are already whole. You can pursue a goal with passion and dedication, but without the crushing weight of your entire identity riding on the outcome. You can experience the full spectrum of human emotions: joy, sorrow, anger, peace, without getting lost in them, because you know that you are the silent, spacious container for them all. The story of the monkeys is, in the end, a comedy. We can smile at their foolishness, at their earnest, misguided efforts, and in that smile, we can find the compassion to smile at our own foolishness.
We have all been that monkey at the bottom of the chain, trying to scoop up the moonlight. We have all felt the strain of holding on and the shock of the branch breaking. It is part of the human journey. The invitation as you drift towards sleep is to gently let go of the chain. You don't need to hold on so tightly to your plans for tomorrow, to your analysis of today. These are just reflections. Let them go. Feel the tension of that striving release from your body. Feel your hands, your jaw, your shoulders soften as they let go of their grip on the branch. There is nothing you need to hold on to. There is no moon you need to rescue. Simply rest. Lift your gaze from the busy surface of the pond of your mind and turn your attention upward, inward, to the vast, silent, peaceful sky of your own awareness. It is always here. It is your true home. It is the real moon, shining serenely, whether the water below is troubled or still. Rest in its light. Part 9. The Weaver's Dream. As the world outside grows quiet and the deep, velvet curtain of night is drawn across the sky, a different kind of activity begins, one that is unseen and unheard. In a celestial workshop, bathed in the soft, silvery light of the stars, a mythical figure known as the Weaver of Days sits at her great loom. This weaver is not a person, but a presence, a silent, graceful energy that is the very consciousness of the world. Her loom is vast, stretching from horizon to horizon, and the threads she uses are spun from the raw material of experience. Each day, as the sun rises, she begins to weave a new tapestry. The thick, sturdy warp threads which run the length of the loom are the constants of existence. The earth beneath our feet, the sky above, the steady rhythm of our own breathing. These threads are the foundation, the silent, unchanging ground of being upon which everything else is woven. Then, with the shuttle of the present moment, she begins to weave the weft, the threads that create the intricate picture of the day. A thread of brilliant gold is the first light of dawn touching the window pane. A thread of coarse, gray wool is the anxiety you felt about a meeting at work. A thread of soft, crimson silk is a moment of shared laughter with a friend. A thread of rough, scratchy hemp is an impatient word spoken in traffic. A thread of shimmering, iridescent fiber is a sudden insight, a moment of clarity. Every single experience, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, becomes a thread in her hands. The taste of your morning tea, the feeling of the sun on your skin, the sound of a distant siren, the memory of a childhood song, the worry about a loved one, the quiet satisfaction of a completed task. All of it is gathered and woven line by line into the vast, complex, and unique tapestry of your day. The pattern that emerges is intricate and
Unpredictable. There are areas of bright, harmonious color where moments of joy and peace are woven together. There are dark, tangled knots of conflict and sorrow. There are long, monotonous stretches of plain, neutral color, representing the mundane and routine parts of the day. And there are sudden, brilliant flashes of unexpected beauty. From a distance, it all comes together to form a single, coherent image, the story of your day. Throughout the day, we are so caught up in the weaving that we cannot see the whole picture. We are like tiny insects crawling on the surface of the tapestry. We are caught in the texture of a single thread, a pressing worry, a consuming desire. We mistake that one thread for the entire reality.
We pull at it, we struggle with it, we get stuck in its fibers, forgetting that it is just one small part of a much larger, ever-changing pattern. Our minds, in their constant activity, are busy analyzing the threads, judging them, wishing some were different, trying to reweave the pattern to our liking. This is the source of our tension, our feeling of being entangled in the complexities of our lives. But the weaver is not like this. She weaves with a calm, dispassionate, and loving attention. She does not judge the threads. The dark, coarse thread of sadness is as necessary to the overall pattern as the bright, smooth thread of joy. The knot of anger is woven with the same care as the shimmering thread of love. She knows that without the dark threads, the light ones would have no contrast, no meaning. She accepts every thread as it is and finds its perfect place in the whole. Her work is a seamless act of acceptance. Now, as the day ends and you lie down to rest, the weaver's work enters a new phase. The time for weaving is over. The great tapestry of the day is complete, and now begins the sacred and gentle work of the unweaving. This is the weaver's dream, the process by which the mind and body are prepared for the deep, restorative peace of sleep. With the same slow, mindful grace, the weaver returns to the tapestry she has just completed. But now, instead of adding threads, she begins to remove them. One by one, she gently unspools the day, returning each thread to its source. She begins with the most recent threads, the ones from the evening. The thread of the story you read, the conversation you had, the sound of you brushing your teeth. She gently plucks each one from the loom, and the thread dissolves back into the silent potential from which it came. The structure of the evening begins to soften, to lose its sharp definition. Then she moves backward through the afternoon. The thread of fatigue you felt after work, the taste of your dinner, the lingering frustration from a difficult task, each one is carefully, tenderly removed. You do not need to hold on to them any longer. The weaver is taking them back. She is unburdening you of the day's accumulated weight. Feel the tapestry of your afternoon gently dissolving, its patterns fading like mist. As she continues, she comes to the more tightly woven sections, the knots of tension and worry. Perhaps there was a conflict, an argument, a moment of fear. These threads are woven in tightly, charged with the energy of your resistance and attachment. The weaver does not yank at them. She is infinitely patient. She gently teases the knot, loosening one fiber at a time. She takes the sharp, jagged thread of a painful memory and, with a touch as soft as moonlight, she unhooks it from the warp. She takes the heavy, leaden thread of a persistent worry and she lifts it from the loom. You can participate in this process. As a memory of a difficult moment from the day arises in your mind, see it as one of these tangled threads, and know that the weaver is here, gently helping you to release it. You do not need to relive it. You do not need to analyze it. You can simply hand the thread over to her. With your out-breath, feel it being lifted from the fabric of your being. Feel the space where the knot used to be become soft, open, and relaxed. The weaver continues her work, moving backward through the day, from noon to morning. The great complex structure of the day is slowly, methodically, being deconstructed. The story of my day, with all its dramas, its successes and failures, its joys and sorrows, is being unwritten. The very fabric of your personal history for this one day is being dissolved. What is left when the threads of experience are removed? Only the warp remains. The silent, steady, foundational threads of pure being. the feeling of your body resting, the gentle, rhythmic pulse of your breathing, the vast, quiet space of awareness itself. This is the loom, stripped bare. This is your essential nature before it is woven with the complexities of a personal story. This is the uncarved block. This is the real moon. This is the state of deep pre-sleep relaxation. The mind, no longer entangled in the threads of the day, can become still. The body, no longer holding the tensions of the day's weaving, can become heavy and soft. You are returning to your source. The weaver's dream is a metaphor for the natural process of letting go that allows sleep to come. Often, we cannot sleep because we are still clinging to the tapestry of the day. We lie in bed and our minds are still weaving, picking at the threads, examining the knots, worrying about the pattern of tomorrow's weaving. We are trying to sleep, but we have not allowed the day to end. The invitation here is to consciously align yourself with the weaver's gentle unspooling. With each breath, feel a thread being released. Let go of what happened at work. Let go of what was said and what was left unsaid. Let go of your plans and your lists for tomorrow. The weaver will gather them all up in the morning and begin a new tapestry, fresh and clean. But for now, the loom must be cleared. The workshop must be allowed to rest in the quiet darkness. Imagine the thoughts and memories of the day as these threads. When a thought appears, see it not as a problem to be solved, but simply as a thread that is ready to be removed. Acknowledge it gently. Ah, the thread of that email I have to send. And then, with your exhale, offer it to the weaver. Feel it being lifted away. Do this with kindness and without force. It is a gentle release, not a violent rejection. As the loom becomes clearer and clearer, you may begin to feel a sense of spaciousness, of lightness. The heavy, complex identity of you, the person who had this particular day, begins to dissolve. What remains is simpler, more fundamental. Just being, just breathing, just resting. This is the threshold of sleep. It is a return to the silent, dreamlike state of pure potential, where the weaver herself rests, waiting for the dawn to hand her the first golden thread of a new day. So, allow the unweaving to complete itself. Trust in this ancient, natural process. The day is done. Its story has been told, its pattern woven. It is held in the past. You do not need to carry it with you into the sanctuary of sleep. Let the great weaver, the loving, silent consciousness that moves through all things, do her nightly work. Let her release you from the intricate web of your own making. Let her guide you back to the simple, silent, empty loom of your own being, where the deepest rest, the most profound peace is waiting for you. The dream of the day is ending, so that the healing dream of the night can begin. This nightly unweaving is not just a passive process. It is an act of profound trust. It is the trust that the day, with all its imperfections and unresolved elements, is complete as it is. We often resist sleep because we feel the day's work is unfinished. Not just the work on our desk, but the inner work. We lie awake, trying to mentally fix a mistake we made, to find the perfect response to a conversation that ended awkwardly, to solve a problem that has been plaguing us. We are like a weaver who refuses to leave the loom, convinced that with just a few more passes of the shuttle, she can perfect the flawed pattern. But the weaver of the cosmos knows that perfection is not found in a flawless pattern.
Perfection is found in the graceful cycle of weaving and unweaving, of creation and dissolution. The day was what it was. The tapestry is what it is. To accept this is a radical act of peace. To allow the weaver to unspool the threads is to say, "It is finished. It is enough. I can let it go." This release is a vital form of mental and emotional hygiene. Imagine if the weaver never cleared her loom. Imagine if, day after day, she simply wove new threads on top of the old ones. The tapestry would become thick, heavy, and impossibly dense. The colors would become muddy, the patterns confused and chaotic. After a time, it would be impossible to weave anything new at all. The loom would be choked with the accumulated weight of the past. This is what happens to our minds when we do not practice the art of letting go. We carry the threads of yesterday and last week and last year with us into the present moment. Our awareness becomes cluttered with old regrets, unresolved grievances, and lingering anxieties. We react to the present through the thick, distorted filter of the past. We are not weaving a fresh new day. We are simply adding another messy layer to an already overburdened tapestry. Sleep, in its deepest essence, is the great unraveler. It is nature's way of clearing the loom so that we can meet the new day with a measure of freshness and clarity. By consciously participating in this process, by aligning our intention with the weaver's dream, we can deepen the restorative power of our rest. Let's feel this process in the body. The body is a physical record of the day's tapestry. The tension in your jaw is the thread of unspoken frustration. The tightness in your stomach is the knot of worry. The ache in your lower back is the heavy thread of responsibility you have been carrying. As you invite the weaver to remove the threads from your mind, you can also invite her to remove them from your body. With each out-breath, imagine the thread of tension in your jaw being gently plucked and dissolved. The muscles do not need to hold on to that story any longer. Let the jaw be slack and heavy. With the next breath, feel the knot of worry in your stomach being patiently unteased by the weaver's gentle fingers. Feel the softening, the warmth, the release in that area as the thread is lifted away. Move through your body in this way. Your shoulders, your neck, your hands, your legs. With each breath, another thread is released. The physical tapestry of the day's stress is being gently and lovingly dismantled. Your body is being returned to its neutral state, to the simple, silent warp of pure physical presence. This practice also changes our relationship with tomorrow. The monkey mind loves to leap ahead, to start weaving the tapestry of tomorrow before today's has even been unspooled. It presents us with threads of future anxieties, of plans and to-do lists. Don't forget you have that important call tomorrow. What are you going to wear? You need to prepare. The weaver, in her wisdom, does not touch these threads. It is not yet time. The shuttle of the present moment has not yet begun to fly for that day. When a thought about tomorrow appears, see it for what it is, a thread from a different tapestry, a story that has not yet begun. You can gently say to yourself, "This is a thread for tomorrow's weaving." The weaver will take care of it then. For now, the loom must be empty. You are not dismissing the importance of the task. You are simply honoring the rhythm of time, the sacred pause between the end of one creation and the beginning of the next. By refusing to weave the future before its time, you protect the sanctity of this present moment of rest. You create a clear, quiet space for deep restoration to occur. The Weaver's Dream is a story of returning to simplicity. Our lives can feel so overwhelmingly complex. We are entangled in 1,000 different stories, responsibilities, and relationships. It is easy to feel lost in the pattern. This nightly ritual of unweaving is a reminder that beneath all that complexity, we are fundamentally simple. Our true nature is not the intricate, tangled pattern. Our true nature is the empty loom, the silent, open awareness that is the ground for all experience. By returning to this ground each night, we are not erasing our lives or our memories. We are putting them in their proper perspective. The tapestry of our life is beautiful and precious, but it is not who we are. We are the weaver, the consciousness that is creating and experiencing it. And like any good artisan, we need to know when to put down our tools, clear our workspace, and rest. So, as you lie here, feel yourself as this great cosmic loom. Feel the last few threads of the day being gently lifted away. The story is over. The image has faded. All that remains is the simple, profound reality of your own being, the steady, silent warp threads, the rhythm of your breath, the feeling of your body heavy and relaxed, the vast, quiet space of your mind, now clear and open. This is the gift of the Weaver's Dream. It is the nightly grace of being unburdened, of being returned to our original, simple nature. It is in this empty, silent space that the body heals, the mind rests, and the spirit is renewed. Trust this process. Allow the day to dissolve. Surrender to the gentle, loving hands of the Weaver. Let her guide you across the threshold, out of the detailed, colorful dream of the day, and into the deep, dark, and restorative silence of the night. As the final threads dissolve, a deep quiet settles. This quiet is not an emptiness, but a fullness. It is the quiet of a workshop at the end of a productive day, filled with the silent satisfaction of work completed. It is the quiet of a field after the harvest, resting and gathering its strength for the next season. This is the state from which all true creativity and renewal are born. The weaver herself now rests. Her hands are still. The great loom stands empty under the starlight, humming with a silent potential. This is the sacred pause, the space between breaths, the silence between notes. It is the moment of pure being before the next moment of becoming. In this deep, clear stillness, you are not the story of your day. You are not your job, your relationships, or your worries. You are not even the body lying here. You are the silent, aware presence that is the source of all these things. You are the weaver, dreaming her own rest. Allow yourself to merge completely with this silence. It is your origin and your destination. It is the gentle, cosmic tide that is now, carrying you out from the shore of the waking world and into the deep, peaceful ocean of sleep. Part 10. The Sound of One Hand. We have traveled a long way together on this quiet path. We have learned to let our stones lie, to sit on the bank of the river of our thoughts. We have found the anchor of the breath and listened to the silence that holds all sound. We have emptied our cup and learned the wisdom of the yielding willow. We have sought the simple beauty of the uncarved block and looked for the real moon in the sky. We have allowed the weaver of days to gently unspool the tapestry of our lives, preparing us for this final threshold. And now, here at the very edge of sleep, in the deep and profound quiet of the night, we come to one last gate. It is not a gate to be forced, but a gate that dissolves when you approach it with a soft and open mind. It is a question, a gentle whisper left by the old masters, designed not to be answered, but to be the final lullaby that quiets the thinking mind and allows the spirit to drift into the great, silent ocean of rest. The question is this. You know the sound of two hands clapping. What is the sound of one hand? In a monastery, long ago, a young monk is given this question, this koan, by his master. The master does not explain it. He simply presents it, like a smooth, dark stone placed in the palm of the monk's hand. Go, the master says, and do not return until you have heard it. The young monk, whose name is Ryusui, which means dragon water, is full of determination. He believes it is a riddle, a puzzle to be solved with his clever intellect. He goes to a small room and he begins to think. The sound of two hands clapping is sharp, clear, a percussive report. It is an event, a coming together. So, what could the sound of one hand be? He holds up his right hand and claps it against his thigh. A dull thud. No, that is the sound of a hand and a thigh. Still two things. He claps it against a wooden pillar in the corridor. A hollow knock. The sound of a hand and a pillar. Still two. He spends the day in a fever of experimentation. He swishes his hand through the air. A soft, whispering whoosh. That is the sound of a hand and the air. He goes out into the garden. He listens. He hears the sharp cry of a hawk high above. Is that it? No. The master would say that is the sound of the hawk's voice and the listening ear. He hears the rustle of bamboo leaves. That is the sound of the wind and the leaves. He hears the trickle of water over stones in the small monastery stream. That is the sound of the water and the stones. Everything he hears, everything he can conceive of, is a sound born of relationship, of two things interacting. Frustrated, he returns to the master. I have thought of many things, he says. The sound of the wind, the sound of a stream, the sound of a bird's cry. The master shakes his head gently.
No, he says, that is not it. You are thinking too much. You are looking for the sound outside of yourself. Go back, and this time, do not think. Listen. Ryusui returns to his practice, but now he is confused. How can he listen for a sound he cannot imagine? He sits in the meditation hall, the silence deep around him. He tries to listen. He hears the soft sound of his own breathing, in and out. But that, he thinks, is the sound of the air and his own body. Still too. He stills his breath, and in the deeper quiet, he can hear the faint, muffled drum of his own heart. But that is the sound of blood and muscle. Still too. He becomes exhausted. His clever mind, which has always been his greatest tool, has failed him. It runs in circles, chasing its own tail, and finds no answer. The question has worn him out. And this, he does not yet realize, is the very beginning of the teaching. The koan is designed to exhaust the logical, dualistic mind. It is a wall that the intellect cannot climb, a knot it cannot untie. And when the striving intellect finally gives up, when it collapses in exhaustion, a different kind of knowing has a chance to emerge. As you lie here, your own mind may be trying to solve the puzzle,
It may be searching for a clever answer. Let it. Allow it to do its work, and feel it, too, grow tired. This question is not for that part of your mind. It is a lullaby for the busy thinker, a gentle command for it to rest. Ryusui, defeated and empty, sits in the deep stillness of the night. He has given up trying to find an answer. He is no longer searching. He is just sitting. He is no longer listening for something. He is simply listening. And in that simple, open, effortless listening, something begins to shift. His awareness, no longer directed outward at specific sounds, begins to turn inward and expand. He is listening not just with his ears, but with his whole being. What is the sound of one hand? The question is no longer a riddle. It has become a gentle, resonant hum in the background of his awareness. It is a soft, persistent vibration that is leading him deeper, beyond the world of opposites. He is no longer thinking about sound and silence as two different things. He begins to feel that all sounds, the creak of the floorboards, the distant hoot of an owl, the beating of his own heart, are born out of a vast, underlying silence. They are like waves appearing on the surface of a deep, silent ocean. The waves are temporary, but the ocean is always there. The sounds come and go, but the silence that allows them to be heard is eternal. The sound of one hand is not a sound that competes with other sounds. It is the silence from which all sounds are born. It is the sound of the ocean itself, not the sound of the waves. Imagine you are standing in a great, silent cathedral. A single, pure note is sung. It fills the space with its beauty. You hear the note, but can you also hear the vast, silent space of the cathedral
that is holding the note? The note could not exist without the silence to contain it. The silence is not the absence of the note. It is its source, its context, its home. When the note fades, what remains? The silence. And it is not an empty silence. It is a silence that is full, resonant with the memory of the note. It is a living silence. The sound of one hand is this living silence. It is the quiet space between your in-breath and your out-breath. For a fractional, timeless moment, there is a pause. In that pause is a profound stillness. That is the sound. It is the deep, dark quiet of the earth in midwinter, resting beneath a blanket of snow, holding the potential of spring in its silent heart. It is the vast, silent field of awareness in which all your thoughts and feelings appear. A thought is a clap. It is the coming together of a subject and an object. But the awareness that knows the thought, the silent, screen-like consciousness on which the thought movie is projected, is the sound of one hand. It does not make a noise, yet without it, nothing could be known. Ryusui is no longer Ryusui, the monk who is trying to solve a problem. The question has dissolved the questioner. He has merged with the listening. He has become the vast, silent space of the meditation hall. He is the stillness that holds the faint scent of incense. He is the cool night air. He is the deep, resonant silence that was there before the temple was built and will be there long after it is turned to dust.
The distinction between inside and outside dissolves. The silence in his own mind is the same silence that fills the room, the same silence that holds the stars in the sky. It is all one seamless fabric of being. There is no separation. There is only this vast, peaceful, silent, and listening presence. And in the depths of this realization, he hears it. It is not a sound that comes through his ears. It is a knowing, a feeling, a resonance in the very core of his being. It is the sound of existence itself, humming its own quiet, eternal song. It is the sound of a thing being purely and completely itself, without reference to anything else. It is the sound of the mountain being a mountain. It is the sound of the star being a star. It is the sound of Ryusui being Ryusui. It is the sound of one. As you lie here on the soft edge of sleep, allow this question to be your guide. Let it lead you away from the world of two, the world of struggle and opposition, of you and your thoughts, of you and your worries, of you and the world. What is the sound of one hand? Do not look for an answer in your mind. Feel for the answer in your being. It is the feeling of your body, a single, unified whole, resting. It is not a collection of parts. It is one body breathing in the quiet. It is the feeling of the room around you, not as a collection of separate objects, but as a single, silent, holding space. It is the feeling of this moment, not as a point between a past and a future, but as a single, seamless, eternal now. Let the question be a gentle broom that sweeps the mind clean of its final lingering thoughts. Each time a thought arises, simply return to the soft, resonant whisper. What is the sound of one hand? The thought will have no answer. It will fall silent, and in that silence, you will find your rest. You are letting go of the world of doing and entering the world of being. In the world of being, everything is one. There is no clapping, no conflict, no separation. There is only the gentle, silent, peaceful hum of existence. Ryusui, sitting in the meditation hall, is no longer awake. He has not fallen asleep in the ordinary sense. He has fallen into the deep, restorative sleep of the universe itself. His small, separate self has dissolved into the one great silent being. The master, passing by, sees him and smiles. He has heard it. He has come home. Allow yourself now to come home. Let go of the question. Let go of the story. Let go of the listener. Dissolve into the sound, the silent sound, the sound of one. The sound of deep, profound, and peaceful sleep. This journey into the sound of one hand is the final act of uncarving. Throughout our journey, we have been letting go of layers, removing the non-essential. Now we come to the final and most subtle duality, the separation between the observer and the observed, the listener and the sound.
As long as there is a you who is trying to hear the sound of one hand, there are still two things, you and the sound. The final gate is the dissolution of this last separation. This is not something you can do in the active sense. It is a surrender. It is like a drop of water falling into the ocean. The drop does not need to try to become the ocean. It simply has to let go of its own boundary, its own sense of being a separate drop. In that letting go, it realizes it was always water, and its true nature is oceanic. As you lie here, feel the boundaries of your physical body begin to soften. The line that separates your skin from the air around you, from the sheets you are lying on, let that line become blurry, permeable. Feel the air you are breathing not as something coming from the outside in, but as a tide that is flowing through a space that is both you and not you. The breath is a great unifier. It is the shared atmosphere of the planet, flowing through every living being. In this moment, your breath is the breath of the trees outside your window, the breath of the sleeping animals, the breath of the entire world. There is only one breath breathing itself. Now, feel the boundaries of your mind begin to dissolve. The thoughts and feelings that you have identified as yours, your worries, your memories, your hopes, see them not as belonging to you, but as clouds passing through a vast shared sky of consciousness. The same thoughts of love, fear, and longing have passed through countless minds for countless generations.
They are not personal. They are universal patterns of energy. By ceasing to claim them as mine, you are released from the burden of them. You are no longer a small, separate mind struggling with its contents. You are the vast, open sky, allowing the weather of the world to pass through without resistance. This is the state of oneness. It is not a mystical, far-off goal. It is the simplest and most fundamental reality, which we obscure with our constant habit of creating separation. The sound of one hand is the felt sense of this reality. It is the resonance of a universe that is not made of separate parts, but is a single, undivided, and intelligent whole. In this state, sleep is not an escape from the world, but a deep immersion into it. It is a return to the source. It is the place where the individual wave sinks back into the wholeness of the ocean, gathering its strength before it rises again as a new form, a new day. This is why deep sleep is so profoundly healing. It is not just a physical rest for the body. It is a spiritual rest for the soul, a remembering of its own boundless nature. The koan of the one hand is a key, a vibrational tone that helps to unlock this gate. It is not meant to be a source of mental strain. If you find yourself tensing up, trying to figure it out, then you are treating it like the sound of two hands. You are creating a conflict. The practice is to soften around the question. Let it be a gentle, curious inquiry, like the touch of a feather. Let it be a mantra, a sound that you repeat softly in your mind, not for its meaning, but for its quality of pointing toward unity and silence. What is the sound of one hand? Let the question itself become a gentle, rhythmic wave washing over your awareness. Let it wash away the last remnants of the day, the last vestiges of a separate, striving self. There is nothing to achieve. There is nowhere to go. Everything you have been searching for, peace, stillness, release, is right here in this simple, unified moment of being. The young monk Ryusui, when he awoke the next morning, was a different man. The world was the same. The sun rose, the birds sang, the chores needed to be done, but he moved through it with a new sense of grace and ease. The desperate striving was gone. The constant, internal chatter of his analytical mind had quieted. He had touched the silent, unified ground of his own being.
and that experience had infused his entire life with a quiet peace. He still had two hands, and he used them to work, to eat, to help others, but he never forgot the sound of one. It was the silent, ever-present music to which he now lived his life. This is the final gift of our journey tonight. It is the invitation to touch this same silent ground. It is the promise that beneath all the noise and complexity of your life, there is a source of profound peace that is your own true nature. You do not need to earn it. You do not need to be worthy of it. You only need to grow quiet enough to hear it. So now, let it all go. The stories, the lessons, the journey itself. Let them all dissolve into the great, silent hum of the one hand. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to understand. There is only rest, deep, boundless, and peaceful rest. Surrender to the silence. It is your oldest friend. It is your truest home. It is the sound that will carry you now, gently and safely, into the healing darkness of a perfect sleep. As you drift in this pre-sleep space, this antechamber of silence, you may notice that the very act of listening changes. You are no longer listening from a specific point, from a location behind your eyes. The listening becomes panoramic, global. You can feel the quiet in your fingertips and your toes. You can feel the stillness in the very marrow of your bones. The listening is no longer an act performed by a self. It is a state of being. The universe is listening to itself through you. This is the final release. There is no one here to fall asleep. There is only sleep itself, a gentle, cosmic tide rising to reclaim one of its own. The sound of one hand is the sound of this return, this homecoming, this final, peaceful dissolving into the one great, silent, dreaming mind.